Chapter 844. Prius Dessau had been living a very comfortable life recently. The experience of working for the Elk family was like a dream, becoming more and more blurry. The knight's skills and training had long been forgotten, and his belly was getting fatter. For this reason, he bought a new set of clothes and changed them into looser cloth trousers and silk robes, which were more convenient for him to move around without losing his noble demeanor, even though he knew that there were no real nobles in His Majesty's territory. Of course, the knight's life was not really a dream, and the polished armor in the living room was proof. Strangely, when he was still the Elk Knight, he could not stand these armors and even wanted to sell them to blacksmiths at a low price. However, after he turned to work for His Majesty, he found these armors to be more pleasing to the eye. One of his favorite hobbies at home was to hold his babbling child and talk about the heroic, past battles in front of the armor. However, in these stories, Prius never mentioned Duke Ryan, as if he had been loyal to Roland Wimbledon from the beginning and was an impeccably loyal minister. After entering City Hall, his career had been steadily improving. Seizing the opportunity of the rapid increase in Neverwinter's population, the chicken and duck breeding area in the north of the city had been expanded again and again, and now it had become an extremely large poultry factory. Yes, he felt that the breeding farm he built was not any worse than those factories that produced machinery. Since His Majesty said this word, he immediately hung a plaque at the gate of the courtyard. Nowadays, many factories had sprung up in Neverwinter, and it had become the most popular word in City Hall. Of course, he could not fall behind. After all, the number of employees alone was as high as 100, and the total number of chickens and ducks was nearly 10,000. The feed and earthworms that they ate every day needed several baskets to carry, which was unimaginable in the past. As for people calling him Chicken and Duck Knight, not only did he not care, but he also enjoyed it. Now that his work was on the right track, Prius was also idle. The first batch of apprentices had learned how to distinguish the male from the female, how to feed, how to select chickens, and so on. They could also train new people, so he did not need to do it himself. Moreover, the foul plague, which was the scariest thing for raising poultry, could be easily dispelled by the witch named Lily. Therefore, it was not a problem for her to do as much business as she wanted. Usually, he only needed to make plans, compile the statistics, and submit them to the Minister of Agriculture. In fact, most of the knight who had been captured with him, apart from a few diehards, were doing quite well. For example, his superior, Sirius Daly, who was originally a wolf knight, had now become a minister. He could be said to be the one who was doing the best. The Light of Dawn, on the other hand, was promoted to an intermediate teacher. His salary was almost the same as his, but when they were chatting, Phil and Schilt seemed to mention that he had other plans and wouldn't be a teacher forever. I don't know where this former celebrity knight will go, but it shouldn't be too bad. There was also Halon, Valsa, Kazan, and the others. They either continued to work as teachers or opened a shop. In his spare time, he would gather with these old acquaintances to chat about daily life, work, and expectations for the future. However, not everyone was convinced by His Majesty. For example, Halon was very dissatisfied with the rule that a captured knight could not join the army, so he always looked depressed at the gatherings. Prius did not think much of it. Everyone knew that flintlocks were powerful. If it were him, he would not be willing to hand it over to a defeated general. As for himself, he set his sights on the annual awards and honors ceremony. According to His Majesty's importance to agriculture, he felt that sooner or later he would stand on the high platform in the square and receive the envious and respectful gazes of the people. Not only would he receive the medal from His Majesty, but he would also receive a reward of 100 golden dragons. This was much more promising than joining the army. Prius hummed a little song as he walked to the city hall. When he was about to say hello to Sirius Daly before going to the farm, the minister stopped him. You came at the right time. His Majesty wants to see you." He paused for a moment and asked, "What's the matter?" "The guard didn't say. He only asked you to go to the castle first." "I see." Prius pretended to be calm, but his heart was beating fast. The agricultural mobilization conference had just ended. Could it be that His Majesty was thinking the same as him and wanted to promote him as a role model? With an expectant mind, he walked into the castle. Then, under the guidance of the guard, he came to the office on the 3rd floor. "Come in." After he reported his name, a familiar voice came from the door. "I've been waiting for you for a while." Officer of the Ministry of Agriculture, Prius Dessa, pays his respects to you. As soon as he entered the door, he knelt on one knee like a knight and clenched his fist in front of his chest. However, his belly was a little fat, so his posture was not as straight as before. When he knelt down, he almost tripped himself. "Get up." His Majesty sat behind the long table and smiled at him. "You've done a good job recently. Even Barav is full of praise for you. This is not an easy task. That's why I have a new mission for you." "Tell me what you want," Prius said respectfully, standing up. "Listen carefully, this is a secret. Even in City Hall, few people know about it." His Majesty suddenly became serious. "And it's of great significance. It's related to the future development of Neverwinter. Once you accept it, you can't reveal what you see or hear to anyone without my permission. I chose you because you're the most suitable person without any precedents, but you're not the only one. If you do well, you don't have to worry about the pay. Now, give me an answer." Prius was stunned. He did not expect that His Majesty would say such a thing. Not only did it have nothing to do with the award, but it seemed that His Majesty was going to put him in a very difficult task. "Oh, don't mention the importance of the task or the generous pay." These were equal to trouble in his eyes, and it was even more troublesome if it was related to the secrets of the kingdom. He subconsciously wanted to refuse, but he suddenly swallowed his words. "Wait, who is it?" "It's the Lord of Neverwinter, the King of Grey Castle." Does a king need to discuss when he wants his subjects to do something? Unless the latter had the intention to rebel and hid in his fief, he had to accept the order no matter what. Otherwise, he would have to bear the king's wrath. His Majesty did not directly give him the order because he cared about his feelings. How could he really allow him to refuse? Prius could not help swallowing his saliva. Even if His Majesty Wimbledon was different from other lords, and every word he said came from his heart, what did he say before? "Please tell me." He had just vowed that there was nothing he couldn't do, but in the blink of an eye, he said that he did not want to do it or could not do it. If he were the king, even if he did not lose his temper on the spot, he would remember this knot in his heart. In the future, he would not even be able to be an ordinary official, let alone participate in the award ceremony and the generous reward. Prius wanted to slap himself on the face. After hesitating for a while, he finally braced himself and replied, "I'm willing to undertake this important task." He could not lose this position. His identity as a knight and his fief no longer existed. If he lost his official position and was no longer in charge of the breeding farm, he would really have nothing. At this moment, the only thing that comforted him was His Majesty's words. "In a situation where there is no precedent, you are the most suitable." At least, this was a kind of affirmation of his ability, right? "Very good." Roland smiled, tilted his head to the empty space beside him, and whispered something. Then he looked at him and said, "Now, come with me to a place." But Prius subconsciously asked in a state of anxiety. Chapter 845. Prius had never heard of this name. Border Town was just a place of residence built for the mine, so it had nothing to do with the word city, not to mention that it was ranked 3rd in the list. Before His Majesty came to the western region, the only place that could be called a city was Longsong Stronghold. But when they entered the cave at the foot of the North Slope Mountain, he realized where His Majesty was referring to. He had always been curious about why the Ministry of Construction built a fortress-like building in Neverwinter. The location of this important place guarded by the First Army was too strange. It was backed by the North Slope Mountain, and the east and west sides were far away from the border. It did not look like it was used to defend against foreign enemies, let alone defend His Majesty's castle. He had asked some colleagues in City Hall, but they all answered that they did not know. Some even said that even the construction team in that place was under the direct jurisdiction of Minister Carr, and others had no right to ask. At this point, Prius did not say anything. He just mentioned it casually because he did not want to get himself into trouble. He did not expect that one day he would set foot on this important military place. When he saw the underground passageway that was obviously artificially excavated, as well as the large group of caves, Prius was so surprised that he could hardly close his mouth. How on earth did they dig it? A year ago, there was nothing here, but now it seemed that the whole mountain had been dug through. With such a spacious underground space, it was no exaggeration to say that it was a city. But was this something that could be done by human beings? He stole a glance at His Majesty, and the awe in his heart deepened. Duke Ryan had indeed picked the wrong opponent. Although the Lion had been in charge of the western region for more than a decade, suppressed all the big families, managed the barren border area like an iron plate, and his means and strength were impeccable, but he was still a human being. However, what shocked the Elk Knight even more was yet to come. When they arrived at a flat and spacious hall in the trailer, two people dressed like warriors surrounded them. Since the First Army had popularized flintlocks, they had rarely seen guards dressed like this. One of them looked him up and down, then turned to His Majesty and said, "Is this really okay? My people will find out about this sooner or later. Instead of hiding it, it's better to accept it slowly," Roland replied. "Let's start with the officials in City Hall." "All right then." The man sighed helplessly, raised his head, and waved at the dome. Following that, a black shadow descended from the sky, silently landing in front of everyone. Prius' heart skipped a beat, and he almost cried out, "Oh my God, what the hell is this?" He felt a chill run down his spine as he stared at the blob monster covered in tentacles. Even a devil from the abyss of hell would probably look like this. The knight wanted to take 2 steps back, but he realized that his legs were no longer listening to him. The only thing that kept him from collapsing was the king, who was still calm and composed. Then he heard a voice. The gentle female voice did not come from beside his ears, but directly sounded in his mind. "Greetings, Your Majesty." "Hello, Pasha," Roland said with a smile. "How are the insects?" "Their numbers have increased a lot. As long as there are enough mushrooms, they seem to keep eating. They seem to be easy to raise. In fact, you can leave this matter to us. When the war starts, you won't be able to spare so many people. Besides, I'm going to raise more than 1,000 insects, so it's better to let them familiarize themselves with them as soon as possible." Prius was stunned to see His Majesty talking and laughing with the monster, as if he was talking to an ordinary subject, and the attitude of the monster was quite respectful, not at all aggressive like a demon. If all the ghosts and monsters in the book talked like this, people would not be so frightened. He took 2 deep breaths and finally calmed his heart down a little. But His Majesty seemed to want him to raise something? Insects? And, is this the big secret that His Majesty told me? At the foot of the North Slope mine, there is such a sensational non-human creature? His Majesty seemed to see through his thoughts. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "This Ms. Pasha used to be a famous lord. Although she was cursed by the demons and became like this, she is still a human at heart. You don't have to be afraid." Lord? Prius was stunned for a moment before he came to his senses. "Yes," the king sighed. "Let's go and talk." Then he heard an incredible story. There was more than one monster like Pasha. 400 years ago, they used to live in the barbarian land and even built their own town, but in the end, they could not resist the double attack of demonic beasts and demons. Most of them died in the wilderness, and only a few escaped to the western region. The curse turned them into monsters and made them immortal, so they had to live with pain. Now, Roland Wimbledon accepted this group of survivors. They were not only allies against the demons, but also subjects under the rule of Grey Castle. "So, that's what happened," Prius murmured. "However, as you can see, their appearance can easily make people think of bad things, so this matter can only be classified as top secret for the time being. Currently, only a few people know about it." Roland paused for a moment and narrowed his eyes. "If it is leaked, you should know the consequences." "I will definitely keep my mouth shut, Your Majesty," Prius quickly emphasized. Although this anecdote was even more incredible than the horror stories told by the old granny, he did not want to care about how much of it was true and how much was false. Whatever His Majesty said, This was the most basic code of conduct for a loyal minister. As long as you understand. His Majesty nodded. After the blob monster. No, the ancient Lord Pasha led them through a long passage. She turned around and said, "We are here." In front of the knight was yet another huge cave. The barren underground suddenly became full of vitality. Not to mention the plants and the underground landscape that he had never seen before, just the giant bugs that were crawling in the mushroom clusters were enough to make him unable to take his eyes off them. Perhaps because he had been stimulated too much, Prius found that he was not so afraid anymore. "Is this the thing you want me to raise?" His Majesty seemed to have been paying attention to his expression. At this moment he finally nodded with satisfaction. "Yes, it's called a rubber worm. It can secrete a very widely used industrial material, which is as important as poultry and eggs. The expedition team found it in the depths of the Great Snow Mountain, so they brought this new species back. Unfortunately, it can only live underground, so the survivors living in the third border city temporarily took care of it." Speaking of this, His Majesty changed the topic. "I heard that in order to raise chickens and ducks, you specially raised a lot of earthworms, right?" Yes. It took Prius a long time to catch up with His Majesty's thoughts. In this way, it can reduce their foraging area, and the poultry will grow much faster. And raising these worms is no different from raising earthworms. I'm not talking about the method of raising them, but the nature. Roland raised his foot and kicked over a rubber worm lying on a mushroom. The worm only reacted when it fell to the ground, dragging its huge belly into the depths of the grass. They are not aggressive, and their favorite food is these mushrooms. Although they are big, they are very timid. You don't have to worry about them biting you. Just collect the mucus in their bellies from time to time. Mucus? Have you seen a cow? The cow is not the point is what it produces. You mean, squeezing it out? If you can find a way to squeeze it out, that's naturally the best. Roland smiled silently. But as I said, the worms are not the point. Sometimes it's faster to kill them and then extract them. Anyway, they reproduce much faster than chickens, ducks, and cows. Somehow, Prius suddenly shuddered. He faintly felt that His Majesty did not like these insects, which were vital to the industry. But this feeling flashed by, and His Majesty returned to his usual tone in the blink of an eye. Some habits of the rubber worms are recorded in this book. He handed over a booklet wrapped in a hard leather cover. You can compare and study it, and then see if there is any way to make them grow faster and make it easier to collect. I hope to see results this month. Yes, Your Majesty. Prius swallowed and took the booklet. But if it's just me. Chapter 846. It was not a whim of Roland to ask the Ministry of Agriculture to raise rubber worms. As an industry as important as oil, it was better for him to take control of it. He would not have set up the farm in the third border city if he had not been worried about the potential threat these worms posed. As for the story of the hapless lord, it was the result of a discussion with Barav and Edith. Compared to the witch empire that ruled the human beings, it was easier to accept the story of the female lord and the destruction of the city-states. Currently, only the senior officials of the city hall and some of the backbone of the First Army knew the truth about the Battle of Divine Will and Tequila. This was not good for the propaganda of the upcoming war, but it was easy to cause panic if they told the truth. Therefore, it was a good compromise to reveal the truth bit by bit to give people some psychological buffer. In order to ensure the stability of the United Front, he even wanted to bury the dark history of the Witch Empire forever. If the human beings could win the Battle of Divine Will, when archaeologists rediscovered this lost record, people would not be bothered by this special period in history. After leaving the Elk Knight in the wormhole and letting him study it by himself, Roland was invited to the center of the underground hall by Pasha. "They're back, Your Majesty." "Who?" Roland couldn't help but raise his eyebrows in response to this question that came out of nowhere. Pasha did not answer. Instead, she raised her tentacles and mysteriously pointed at a dark passage on the side of the hall. He turned his head and saw a white shadow moving in the dark tunnel. After a while, 2 giant devouring worms crawled out of the cave, wriggled their bodies in front of him, and opened their bloody mouths full of hooked teeth. "Your Majesty, do you remember us?" one of them said cheerfully. Roland was slightly startled. Molly and Lara? Of course, he would not forget their names so quickly. The scene of their parting that day was still fresh in his mind. After frankly saying that he did not regret it, he boarded the cement boat to the Great Snow Mountain. Even now, he could still feel their unwavering determination from their tone. "Yes, you do remember. Mind your manners." The other one squeezed its partner with its tail. "Even if our bodies are different, don't forget that we are tequila." "Worm," Jasmine said deliberately. "Which?" cried Lara. "They've just arrived in Neverwinter. They really wanted to see you before they went to sleep, so I asked them to wait at the side of the hall. I hope they didn't disturb you." Pasha lowered her mane whiskers. "Tequila thanks you again for your help." "No, I've also been waiting for the good news of the successful transformation." Roland waved his hand nonchalantly. "But why do you need to hibernate?" "Because the worm carrier consumes too much energy, Your Majesty. Fran can handle the usual excavation and transportation work alone. There's no need to maintain 3 hosts at the same time. Before coming here, even Fran had to hibernate a lot. Before her transformation, she clearly had a lively personality like Jasmine, but now she felt that she had matured a lot. It was as if the instant her soul had been transferred had allowed her to truly mature. After spending some time with Phyllis and the others, Roland realized that not every tequila which had lived such a long time. In the beginning, they lacked a carrier and Scourge's body. They either chose to merge with Eleanor, one of the 3 chiefs, or transfer to a soul carrier and enter an unconscious long sleep. It could be said that the number of witches who had lived for hundreds of years could be counted on one hand. By the time the church was established in Starfall City and they were provided with a body, it was already much later. Phyllis had changed her body twice, but she had only maintained a conscious state for about 150 years, excluding the initial period when she was at a loss and did not know what to do. Thus, she was already considered an elder among the survivors. Jasmine and Lara were considered the youngest batch. Aside from the time they spent familiarizing themselves with controlling their bodies, they were usually in a state of hibernation. Their actual age and mental age were not far apart. With such a transformation, Roland could not help but feel emotional. And the rarest thing was that after becoming devouring worms, they still maintained the vigor they had when they were humans. Just this point alone made them surpass many people. Now it seemed that the Union was able to become a powerful force that unified the whole continent for a reason. Apart from their ability, they had many other praiseworthy qualities. 3 worm carriers aren't a lot. If we want to build a defensive barrier in the impassable mountain range, Roland looked at Pasha. Keep them awake. The new project will start soon, and there are many places in Neverwinter that need to be rebuilt. Don't worry about food, City Hall will provide it. Really? Jasmine asked excitedly. No one liked to sleep forever, especially the tequila witches. They had slept for too long. As long as they don't eat meat for every meal, he spread out his hands. According to Fran's way of eating, they can only eat about 100 people's meals. Since you have a plan, I'll leave them to you. Pasha seemed to have expected him to say this and replied with a smile. After seeing Jasmine and Lara, Roland felt inexplicably relaxed. When he returned to the castle, the First Army also sent him the latest news. The blasting operation at the Snow Mountain was very successful. The passage through which the underground river flowed into the sea had been completely blown up, and the rising water was expected to continue to flow westward after swallowing the ruins. Except for the gun battalion that would continue to guard the Snow Mountain and observe the change of the water flow, the rest of the soldiers would return to Neverwinter in a few days. This was not unexpected. When the Tequila Witches finished searching the underground ruins and obtained the devouring worms, the exploration came to an end. In this way, the entire western region would have no worries for the time being. However, when he opened another letter, he could not help but let out a soft cry of surprise. This letter came from the northern region, but it was not sent by a flying courier. Instead, it was specially sent by the garrison troops to Duke Kant. Therefore, the content was very detailed, and there were as many as 4 pages. The letter described in detail the changes that had happened in the holy city of Hermes and the news of the collapse of the Tower of Babel. Eagle Face, the commander of the troops, thought that this was an excellent opportunity to attack. Considering the thick walls and giant catapults around the holy city, he hoped that His Majesty could dispatch 1 or 2 artillery squads to reinforce the northern region, and was willing to win the first victory for His Majesty since the beginning of spring. After reading it, Roland still could not believe it. The church built by the Union in the Starfall City had collapsed just like this? Was this a message released by the opponent to lure the enemy, or was it true? After all, the church still had a certain number of God's punishment army, and dragging the first army into the quagmire of urban warfare was their last struggle. He had originally planned to let the God's punishment witches participate in this battle, which just happened to make up for the shortcoming of the first army's lack of close-range firepower. At the same time, the new weapon, the mortars, would be put into use, further reducing the enemy's hiding space. It could be said that although Roland's goal was to unify the whole country, in fact he only cared about the church. However, the holy city now showed signs of disintegration. Just when he was about to summon the relevant personnel to discuss the matter, he heard a light knock on the French window behind him. When he turned around, Nightingale had directly pulled the bird into the room through the glass. Taking the secret letter from the bewildered messenger's feet, Roland spread it out and flattened it. After glancing at it, he could not help but stand up. How dare he? There was only one sentence written on the note. Chapter 847. Pain. Very painful. Unbearable pain. It slapped its tentacles in frustration, stirring the surrounding seawater into a muddy mess. The blades and feet hidden in its body were shivering, obviously frightened by its anger. Pain was not a strange feeling. From its birth to becoming an eye of branch nest, it had fought with enemies more than once, been injured, swallowed, and evolved. Pain could make the body more responsive, and it was the necessary feedback to absorb magic power. What made it angry was not pain, but an emotion that it had never felt before. It tried to match this emotion with the reaction of other lives, but soon found that it was unnecessary. The feeling was hidden in the instinct of most species. Even if the individuals were far apart, they were surprisingly similar on this point. It found that it had tasted fear for the first time. This made it a little overwhelmed, and it subconsciously became angry. Kill her. It wanted to kill her. The tiny insect that rushed into its body, the insect that dared to challenge it with only some insignificant magic power. Sooner or later, it would tear her into pieces and hang her head on the skeleton, just like the red mist crawlers did. However, whether it was anger or fear, they were not necessary emotions for growth. Before, it had never felt fear because of pain, nor would it feel annoyed because of a momentary setback. In fact, it had never thought about such a problem before. Other than evolution, it had no other thoughts. Evolution was more important than survival. Survival was only for the individual, but evolution was the sublimation of the group. It realized that there was something wrong with its body. What exactly was wrong? Just thinking about this problem made its head hurt unbearably. That high-temperature flame not only caused it to lose a third of its body, it also made its reaction extremely slow. It needed time. Time could allow its body to be reborn as before. Time could also make it find the answer. It suppressed the fear, anger, and other subtle emotions in its heart that it had never experienced before, and sank into the mud at the bottom of the sea. More than 10 days later, it crawled out of its hiding place and released all the blades and feet in its body. Although it had lost a lot in the battle, it did not care. As long as its injuries were fully recovered, it could breed new vassals at any time. It was hungry, and it needed food. At the same time, he also came to a conclusion about some of his own problems. First of all, it discovered that it had lost a lot of pheromones. These pheromones were taken from various insects and could provide help to the evolution of the tribe. Collecting them was also the primary task of the Eyes of Branch Nest. This loss was understandable. Following that loud noise, its body was scattered by the raging flames and heat waves, and part of it was used to store the pheromones in its brain. Now, even if it was almost repaired, it was gone. Just like a punctured water bag, it would be useless even if it was repaired afterwards. This was not a big deal. Insects were everywhere. If they were lost, they could be collected again. Moreover, the most important red mist multi-eyed worm was not lost, so the losses were limited. However, the problem was that it had lost contact with the nest mother. This was simply inconceivable. Ever since it was born, its fate had been closely linked to its tribe. This kind of relationship was inseparable. As long as it was in the same body of water, no matter how far away it was, it would be able to sense the existence of the main nest. Through the water ripples, it could transmit the information it collected, as well as share the tribe's evolutionary instructions. But now it was all gone. After it was injured, it had almost never thought about this. When its consciousness was flowing smoothly and it was ready to transmit the pheromones of the multi-eyed worm, it suddenly realized where the strange feeling came from. Even when the tide fell and the body of water returned to one, it could not hear the call of the main nest. At first, it suspected that its body had not been completely reborn, but as long as it was not completely dead, any individual separated from the main nest would not be cut off. After repeated examination, it found that part of its brain had actually merged with the red mist multi-eyed worm, instead of being completely swallowed. Obviously, the worm had taken advantage of its weak state to make a final struggle. After realizing this, it was shocked and angry at first, but soon it calmed down. A low-energy worm was a worm. Even so, it did not gain any advantage. It could not feel the existence of the multi-eyed worm at all. On the contrary, all the remaining eyes of the red mist worm belonged to it. Through these strange magic eyes, it could see many primitive life forms looking at it. After thinking for a long time, it finally came to a conclusion. It was this part of the fusion that made it unable to contact the main nest, and also caused it to be infected with some strange worm emotions. For example, fear. For example, anger. And ego. According to the above results, it should first return to the Zenith Sea, tell everything that happened here to the mother of the nest, and then hand itself over to the mother of the nest. In the case that the water wave transmission did not work, swallowing could completely retain the pheromones, thus helping the tribe to obtain usable evolutionary instructions. Evolution was more important than survival, which was a matter of course. But now it was hesitating. In the past 10 days, it found that it had thought about more things than it had in the past 100 years. Whether it was fighting, swallowing, collecting, or growing, they were all instinctive, but now it seemed that this instinct did not exist. Another point was that there were no restrictions on the use of the pheromones. Evolution was a very careful choice. All the pheromones collected by the nest eyes were transmitted to the main nest, which would analyze and filter the useful fragments, reconstruct them, and then issue evolutionary instructions. Evolution was not only a change in the nest eyes, but also in the main nest and the small ones such as the blade and the foot. All of them grew step by step in this way. Therefore, the eyes of each branch nest were almost the same. But when it was waiting for its body to recover, it unexpectedly used a pheromone from a primitive individual that could heal itself quickly. Because of this, the serious injury that needed at least a few months to heal was healed in just 10 days, and it also made it realize that it was different. It was no longer an ordinary nest eye. The foot quickly dragged back a lot of food, which were the primitive aquatic bodies nearby, or according to the insect's name, fish. Most of them were cleanly beheaded by the blade, and the spread of the fishy smell would inevitably attract more fish. It would not take long for the foot to fill its stomach. These inferior aquatic bodies enjoyed the same resources as it, but they were still at the bottom of the competition. For some reason, when it saw these mindless fish coming to its door, it suddenly thought of itself. Since it already had fear, it did not want to return to the Zenith Sea. The insect's emotions disturbed it, and at this moment, the importance of survival was more important than anything else. It was afraid that the mother of the nest would swallow it, and it was also afraid that the erratic insect would come to it again. It also wanted revenge on the insect. The anger in its heart did not dissipate, but it temporarily hid it. Fear and anger alternated, and it found that there were still many things it wanted, which it had never considered before. If it wanted to achieve these things, evolution was the only way. After swallowing the fish into its body, it could not wait to take action. In the past, it would not have been so anxious. All the nest eyes were doing the same thing, and it did not matter whether it was there or not. But now it was different. The following collection and evolution had nothing to do with the tribe. Chapter 848. Audiobook is an ally of Grey Castle. He doesn't deserve this. What's more, he messed up the eastern region this time. What about the next time? Maybe he'll cross the border and invade us. Brian said loudly, "Your Majesty, please give the order. No matter how far the enemy is, the first army will crush them for you." Invade? Barav raised his eyebrows. If the army of the Kingdom of Dawn can openly enter Grey Castle, why do we need you? Director, I'm just giving an example. A non-existent example is not convincing, Barav interrupted. And most importantly, why do we need to go to war when we can solve the problem through diplomatic means? Don't forget His Majesty's primary goal this year. Do you think the eldest son of a noble family in the city of Glow is more important than His Majesty's ceremony? Brian was speechless. All right. Take a break. Roland clapped his hands. Eat something first. We'll talk later. With the clapping of hands, the servants at the door immediately pushed a cart into the reception hall. The officials ate their snacks and went to the toilet. The tense atmosphere immediately eased. This scene had happened many times during the 3-day-long meeting. Since receiving the information about the Northern Region garrison and the spy Hillfox, Roland summoned all the relevant officials to the castle to discuss the next countermeasures. It was evident that the bureaucrats under him were divided into different factions. The City Hall faction led by Barav tended to be conservative. They preferred to focus on the kingdom, or even the western region. They wanted to expand the population and strength step by step until the unification of Grey Castle's regime was complete. They would retaliate against Apen Moya, the King of Dawn, sooner or later, but now was not the time. The First Army, represented by Brian, and the members of the advisor department tended to be radical, but they were not as close as the City Hall faction. The former was probably influenced by the new ideas that he advocated when training the army, such as defending against the enemy outside the borders, discovering the enemy first, and destroying the enemy first. They insisted on taking action immediately to teach the royal family of the Kingdom of Dawn a lesson and rescue the persecuted Audiobook. The latter, to a large extent, stood on the same side as the First Army for the reward. After all, if there was no war, they would not be able to play a role. In addition, some of the members of the advisor department came from Longsong Stronghold and did not know as much about Neverwinter as the City Hall. Their arguments were often refuted, so their voices were even weaker. Because of this, Brian's speech was easily rebutted by Barav several times. In terms of eloquence, the disparity between the two of them was too great. It was already good enough that he could express his thoughts in front of a group of ministers. After all, the Flintlock Battalion commander was still young, and he used to be an ordinary villager in Border Town. He lacked both knowledge and experience, which could be seen from the report of the defensive battle at the Snowy Mountain. Roland was the only one who remained silent. Judging from the current situation, the radicals were basically being beaten up by the conservatives. It had to be said that in the past 3 years, Barav's growth was even more outstanding than he had expected. Perhaps the old chief had been sufficiently tempered by the former finance minister, and all he lacked was an opportunity. The only thing that surprised Roland was that Edith hadn't expressed her opinion even though the meeting had been going on for 3 days. Instead, she had remained silent. If there was anyone in the hall who could compete with Barav, it would be the Pearl of the Northern Region. In order not to let the two of them drag each other down and increase the loss of internal strife, Roland officially set up a new department in the City Hall, called the Department of Defense, which was responsible for external military affairs. He also included the General Staff Department, making it a subordinate organization. The Ministry of Defense was in charge of external affairs, while the Security Bureau was in charge of internal affairs. Basically, the framework of Grey Castle's violent machine had been established. Of course, the minister was still Roland. Before this, Edith was only Barev's assistant, staying in the city hall to learn how to deal with affairs. Despite her excellent performance, she had not officially joined the department until now. If she became the minister as soon as she entered the department, she would be promoted too quickly and would not be rewarded in the future. It was also easy to leave the wrong impression to the newcomers that she could do it if she was in charge. After all, it was no longer the time when there was a shortage of manpower, and anyone with a little bit of talent could become the main official. So Edith was now a clerk in the Department of Defense, and like the general staff, she was managed by Roland. Roland knew that this arrangement, which seemed to be starting all over again, would not discourage the Pearl of the Northern region. A person like the Pearl of the Northern region should be able to guess what he was thinking. Although she had left the director's office, there was no longer any obstacle to her promotion. Therefore, this was a suitable occasion for her to perform, and Barev should not be allowed to suppress the whole audience. This was indeed a bit unusual. He glanced at Edith's seat and found that she was leisurely tasting the chaos drink in her glass, as if Barev's aggressive momentum had nothing to do with her. She was indeed a strange woman. Roland shrugged his shoulders, reached out to Scroll, and said, "Show me today's summary." Scroll put down her quill and handed him a hardcover book. "It's all in here." After 3 days of discussion, they had basically reached a consensus on the content of the intelligence. Hill Fox, who sent the secret letter, arranged the 3 matters according to their importance. That was to say, the disturbance in the eastern region was the most important, and Otto's imprisonment was not so important. Therefore, the eldest son of the Luashi family should not be in danger in the short term. Apen Moya had just ascended the throne and still needed the support of the 3 families in the city of Glow. Even if the King of Dawn wanted to find someone to replace him, the process would not be too fast. They thought it would take at least 1 to 2 years. Otto was likely to suffer a lot, but it would not be difficult for him to survive. Secondly, the news of the unstable situation in the Holy City and the report of the Northern Region garrison confirmed each other, so it could basically be confirmed as a fact. However, even the city of Glow had reacted, which might mean that the Moya royal family had set their eyes on the church. Not to mention the hatred between the 2 sides, everyone knew that Hermes stored the wealth accumulated by the church for hundreds of years. It would undoubtedly be a very tempting choice to take advantage of the opportunity to eat it. Chapter 849. For the 2 factions, there was no objection to reclaiming the eastern region or destroying the church, which had already been included in the plan during the previous meeting. The only disagreement was when to retaliate against the Kingdom of Dawn. Because of Roland's previous diplomatic attitude, no one suggested to take a step back and let bygones be bygones. However, the City Hall officials still hoped to negotiate with Roland, justifiably, after the coronation ceremony, and they did not rule out the use of force. Obviously, the future planning meeting during the months of demons had given them enough temptation and motivation. They all wanted to support Prince Roland to ascend the throne as soon as possible and become the true king of Grey Castle. At the same time, they could also become real ministers of the kingdom from local officials. If they wanted to fight in the Kingdom of Dawn, not only would they need to mobilize a large number of troops and resources, but the coronation ceremony would also be affected. No king would send out his own elite generals to complete the coronation ceremony hastily, which would not be good for anyone. Of course, the final decision was still up to Roland. During the 3 days, he just watched the discussion and did not show any obvious preference. He was completely different from the tough attitude he had when he was dictating the diplomatic letter. It was precisely because of his silence that the people had the space to debate intensely. It was not that he had changed his original intention, but he was waiting for an opportunity. An opportunity to gain the most benefits with the least cost. In the evening, someone knocked on the office door. When he saw that it was Andrea, he heaved a sigh of relief. Finally, she came. If she did not come to him, he would have to find her himself, which would undoubtedly be much less effective, and it was hard to say whether he would succeed or not. "Here, dried fish. Nightingale appeared and handed her a piece of honey-roasted fish. Apart from Vendi, Andrea was one of the few witches who could share snacks with Nightingale. Perhaps this was the mutual attraction between the nobles? Thank you. But Andrea did not seem to be in high spirits. She took the dried fish and put it in her pocket, then put her hand on her chest and bowed. Your Majesty, I. Halfway through her sentence, she stopped again, as if she didn't know how to express herself. You want me to save your childhood friend, Otto Luashi, right? At a time like this, Roland couldn't let Andrea hesitate any longer. If she changed her mind, wouldn't he have wasted these days? In addition, he also vaguely guessed the other party's hesitation. There was one thing he was sure of, and that was that the relationship between Ao Tua and her was a one-sided crush. Because of this, she didn't know what position she should use to make this request. Childhood playmates. After so many years, Andrea did not miss her past in the Kingdom of Dawn. After all, when Earl Quinn found out that she was a witch, he did not protect her and directly faked an accidental death. This kind of memory was really not very good. When Otto visited Neverwinter last winter, Andrea's behavior was very clear. She obviously did not want to be associated with the past. Now that he had come looking for him, it was probably because he was simply kind and apologetic. Yes. She took a deep breath and nodded slowly. But in the meeting, you also heard the discussion. If we want to force Appin to submit, we need at least more than 3,000 troops. Including the troops attacking the Holy City, the number will increase to about 5,000, which is already 80% of the strength of the First Army. Despite the disagreement, City Hall and the General Staff Department still made a rough plan. As there was no water system directly connected to Grey Castle in the Hermes Plateau and the Kingdom of Dawn, they could only rely on carriages and manpower. The number of people in the logistics team was astonishing. Moreover, the remaining 20% of the troops had to stay in various parts of the kingdom, so the First Army had no spare troops to garrison and could only leave after the battle. All in all, it was definitely a loss. This is just the manpower. If we include the materials, all kinds of wear and tear, the cost of carriages and horses, the expenditure of provisions, looking at Andrea's increasingly embarrassed expression, Roland was about to add fuel to the fire, but his voice suddenly stopped. Your Majesty? The blonde witch could not help but be stunned. It was not because he noticed something wrong, but because Nightingale pinched him hard on the back and then said in a voice so low that only he could hear, Don't force her. Can't you just say it? It's nothing, Roland coughed twice. This is just an objective situation. With some subjective efforts, it's not impossible to turn the situation around, but it depends on how much the three big families are willing to do. The three big families? Obviously, the king no longer trusts them. We may be able to save Otto, but this will also cause a complete break between the Moya royal family and the Luashi family. Even if Appin is removed from the throne, will the next king of Dawn forget all this? Roland touched his chin and said, Facing a strong enemy like the demons, I can't invest too much energy and manpower in the neighboring countries. In the end, it's them who decide the direction of the Kingdom of Dawn. Andrea seemed to realize something. Please continue. Someone must replace the Moya royal family, he said word by word. Andrea was silent for a moment. I see. Do you have a plan? She is indeed a woman from a big family, Roland thought to himself. She can remain calm in the face of the overthrow of the royal power, which will undoubtedly make the following conversation much easier. He asked straightforwardly, Are you interested in becoming the King of Dawn? Your Majesty? Andrea finally showed a look of surprise this time. I don't want to leave. Leave what? She bit her lip and said, No, nothing. I mean, I'm not interested in the throne of the City of Glow. Roland was a little surprised. It was not that she did not want to become the king of the Kingdom of Dawn, but her expression clearly showed that she was worried about personal gains and losses, which was rare in Andrea, who was always full of a sense of elegance. Was there anything more tempting than becoming the king of a country? Roland calmly took a sip of tea. Fortunately, he had a backup plan. What about your father? Is he willing to step forward? The reason why the Quinn family was the best choice was not only that it was stronger than the other two families, but also that Andrea, who was favored by Otto and Oro, was also the key. It could be said that her opinion, in a sense, represented the three families more. According to the education level of Neverwinter, the number of people trained was not enough for the kingdom. It was not realistic to completely control the Kingdom of Dawn, so it was more convenient to support a regime that was more inclined to Grey Castle. If Andrea agreed to this plan, he would not have to pay too much and would still be able to get the resources of the neighboring country. Of course, the other two families won't be left without anything. This change of power will make all the participants winners. More importantly, the threat above your heads will no longer exist. Roland said slowly, "In this way, Neverwinter doesn't need to spend a lot of money and troops. You just need to help the Quinn family complete this change." This time, Andrea did not hesitate for too long. After thinking for a while, she agreed. "I think my father will agree." After a short pause, she repeated, "No, he will definitely agree." When she said this, Roland knew that she completely understood what he meant. The time was ripe. Chapter 850. I thought you were going to be the King of Dawn yourself. After Andrea left, Nightingale curled her lips and said, "So you weren't joking that day. Do you really want to help her become queen?" "It's not like you can't tell." Roland shrugged. "As for me..." Countless thoughts flashed through his mind, from the lack of talents to the efficiency of communication, from the lack of time to the limited resources. In the end, he could only say, "I'm still too far away to help." "Is that so?" Nightingale patted him on the shoulder and said, "But don't worry, Andrea is still very reliable. The Quinn family shouldn't be too bad either." I didn't know that these two noble witches really appreciated each other. Roland laughed inwardly. However, Nightingale used to live under someone else's roof, so her political vision was not as good as Nightingale's. This had nothing to do with her family. As long as she was not blindly loyal, most people would know what to choose when they had a chance to rise to the top without paying too much. However, he did not say this out loud. After all, Nightingale was too cute when she talked nonsense with a straight face. At this moment, someone knocked on the office door again. "Come in." The door opened, and Isabella appeared at the door. Roland was also a little surprised. Logically speaking, she was not a member of the Witch Union and should not be able to enter and leave the castle district normally. However, after seeing Agatha's figure outside the door, he roughly understood how she had found him. "Your Majesty." The pure witch who belonged to the church bowed and went straight to the point. "I heard from Agatha that the Church of Hermes is about to collapse?" If it were not for her rather serious expression, Roland would have thought that she was here to plead for her old friend from the church. That's what the intelligence said, but the specific situation is still under investigation. Although he did not understand why the ice which revealed these things to Isabella, he still nodded and said, "Church fugitives have appeared in both Coldwind Ridge and the western part of the Kingdom of Dawn. According to their confessions, the cathedral that represented the faith of the Holy City seemed to have collapsed overnight. I hope you can send an army to Hermes as soon as possible." "What's the reason?" "Do you still remember the hundreds of thousands of pills of madness that I mentioned before? I don't know how many people know the location of the warehouse where the pills are stored, but it shouldn't be too few. If it is leaked, I'm afraid it will have a negative impact on your future plans." She paused for a moment before continuing, "And these things will be of great help to the battle of divine will. It's best to collect all of them and transport them back to Neverwinter." Only then did Roland remember that the information provided by Zero did mention such a thing. It seemed that Zero planned to gather all the humans and fight the demon army to the death. Her trump card was a large number of berserk pills. As he looked down upon these worthless drugs, he put the matter to the back of his mind. But now, the situation had changed. Isabella was right. If someone spread the pills and it fell into the hands of the nobles of Grey Castle, the Kingdom of Dawn, or even the Blackstreet Rats, it would cause a lot of trouble. It might not be enough to deal with a fully armed army, but it was enough to attack the officials he sent out and the local government. Where are the pills stored? He looked at Isabella. They're scattered in secret warehouses on the Hermes Plateau. It's hard for me to tell you exactly where they are. Isabella hesitated for a moment. If you trust me, please let me go with the army. I used to be the Pope's agent. This identity should be able to slow down the speed of the collapse. If the internal collapse is too fast, even the army can't control the situation. But who knows if you'll use your identity to do something else, Nightingale said. For example, secretly releasing those believers. You know some of them, don't you? You know I didn't lie to His Majesty. Isabella shook her head. Zero has already proved who's the god's favorite. I don't need to do those things in vain. If necessary, the army can also set up a trap in advance. I'll lure the believers into it and then eliminate them all. The way to maintain order is not only to use my identity to restrict them, but also to completely annihilate them. Nightingale could not help but be stunned. She spat in a low voice and said, "It's really a pure witch's means." Roland could not help but feel a little emotional. Nightingale was speechless for a moment, so there was no doubt that Isabella was serious. Although Isabella had expressed complete submission to him that day, it was based on the premise that he could fight against the demons. Unlike most witches, Isabella had received the same education as the pure witches. As long as she could achieve her goals, she did not care about the lives of ordinary people. After thinking for a moment, he slowly said, "I can let you go with the First Army, but you don't need to participate in the battle. You just need to find those pills and then destroy them on the spot." "Your Majesty," she said with a frown. "Although the berserk drugs will overdraft one's life, in a desperate fight, say no more." Roland reached out and interrupted her. "Speaking of order, I have another task for you." Isabella immediately lowered her head and said, "Please tell me. There are still several cloisters in the old holy city, right?" "Yes, but there are no witches in them." She thought for a moment and changed her words. "There may be awakened ones in the months of demons last year, but the chances of them surviving are not high. It doesn't matter. Release all the orphans, take good care of them, and then bring them back to the Western region." She was stunned. "All of them?" "Yes, you're in charge." Roland nodded. If the pure witch's philosophy was to complete the task without caring about the lives of others, he would like to see if the pure witch could still carry out this goal when carrying out a life-saving task. He could not change what had happened in the past, but he did not want her to continue on this path. This request is not without reason. Also, thank you for reminding me. If the upper class loses the ability to maintain order, the cloisters are likely to become a hell on earth. Neverwinter needs a large number of laborers, and women can also find suitable jobs. I remember the church will provide basic education to the orphans, right? Therefore, they were all excellent seedlings and should not starve to death in the high walls. I want you to bring them back as much as possible without missing any of them." Isabella was silent for a long time. "That will require a lot of food. Someone will prepare it for you." A complicated look emerged in the eyes of the pure witch. This scene seemed familiar. On the day she was announced to be pardoned, took off the shackles, and obtained limited freedom, she showed the same look. If her heart could be heard, the biggest question must be why. But she didn't say anything. Instead, she slowly bent down. Chapter 851. Edith returned to her residence, took off her coat, and threw it on the hanger at the door. She could not help but take a deep breath at the rich aroma coming from the living room. Saliva gushed out of her dry lips and tongue. She did not feel it during the meeting in the Ministry of Defense, but now her stomach was growling. "Why are you back so late today?" Cole's voice came first, and then he poked his head out from behind the door frame, holding a spoon in his hand. "The war is about to start. The Ministry of Defense has a lot of work to do, especially when it comes to the Kingdom of Dawn. The situation is more complicated." She took off her leather boots, put on a soft sock, and walked into the living room. "You can eat first if you come back so late again." "I don't care." Cole curled his lips. "But His Majesty hasn't decided whether to interfere with the King of Dawn or not, right? If you make a plan now and he adopts Barev's strategy, won't your efforts be in vain? Do you really think he doesn't have any ideas? Edith patted her brother's head as she walked past him. Roland Wimbledon is not a king who relies on his subordinates to make decisions. What did you see? Cole asked curiously. If you want to know, you have to pay the price. She glanced at him, and his body suddenly trembled, and he did not continue the conversation. There were 2 dishes and a soup on the table, and the main ingredient was Neverwinter's specialty, bird beak mushrooms. Recently, this extremely delicious and juicy mushroom began to appear in the convenience market in large quantities, either because of the increasing number of hunters or because of the discovery of a new source. At the same time, the price of this mushroom did not rise but fell, and it seemed to be replacing meat. It was a pity that bird beak mushrooms could not be stored for a long time due to their fat characteristics. Otherwise, it would be an excellent business outside the western region. Edith put a piece of roasted mushroom into her mouth. The slightly charred mushroom cap and melted butter perfectly. After a crisp sound, she felt her entire mouth was filled with juice, and she let out a long hum of satisfaction. She had to admit that she had underestimated her brother. Apart from his indecisiveness and weakness in martial arts, Cole's talent in learning was beyond her expectations. Take cooking for example. He had only eaten these mushrooms once or twice at His Majesty's banquets, but they looked decent. It was impossible to do this without a clever mind. It was the same for the clerical work in the city hall. He had only been doing it for a few months, but he was already an official recorder at important meetings in the Lord's castle. This speed had already surpassed many of his peers. If it were the noble children in the north who thought that they were the best, they might not be able to do better. Of course, the most important thing was that he was very obedient. Thinking of this, Edith felt that the dinner was even more delicious. After all, the more capable his subordinates were, the easier it would be to do certain things. Sis. Halfway through his meal, Cole could not help but ask, "Why didn't you speak during the conference these few days?" She put down her spoon and raised her eyebrows. "His Majesty asked you about the things you're good at, right? Since you saw through His Majesty's intention, why didn't you say it for him?" Cole muttered. "Didn't you see the way Barev looked at you? That smug smile was almost overflowing. That's also a secret. According to the usual practice, He bowed his head, and his expression showed that he was in a dilemma. After hesitating for a long time, he shook his head, as if trying to suppress his curiosity. "But for the sake of this delicious dinner, I'll take it as you've already paid the price." Edith smiled slightly. "How much do you know about Andrea in the Witch Union?" "Andrea?" Cole thought for a moment. "Her name has never appeared on the schedule, and her ability, it has nothing to do with her ability," the Pearl of the Northern region interrupted. "It's normal that you don't know about her. She's a combat witch, and she rarely shows herself. Only a few people know about her background. As far as I know, Andrea is a noble from the Kingdom of Dawn, and her family background is quite noble. She's also an old friend of Otto Luashi. After knowing this, we can roughly deduce the rest." Then she briefly explained her speculation. "Now do you understand why I couldn't speak up at the meeting? Once the emotional card is revealed, what could have been achieved will no longer be possible. Wouldn't His Majesty blame me for this?" Cole's eyes widened. "How do you know all this? Do you think I applied to go to the Great Snow Mountain just to prove that only people who have been to the front line are suitable to serve as important officials? That's just one of the reasons." She spread out her hands. "Without this trip, it's not easy to get close to witches." Cole frowned and thought hard for a while. "No, that's not right. Assuming that the information you've gathered is correct, how can you be sure that His Majesty will definitely choose Andrea as a shortcut to solve the problem of the Kingdom of Dawn? There's no definite connection between the two. Can't he think of recovering the kingdom first and put the coronation ceremony first? Indeed, there's no definite connection between the two, but I noticed His Majesty's behavior at the meeting. It's hard not to understand," Edith said confidently. "In 3 days, he looked at Andrea a total of 17 times. She's neither an official of the city hall nor a key decision maker. If there's nothing between them, Then there must be a conspiracy. You even remember this? She picked up the soup bowl and put on the posture of a meeting. Just like this, out of the corner of my eye, His Majesty definitely didn't expect that while he was staring at Andrea, someone else was watching him. The younger brother's mouth twitched with a strange expression and he muttered something in a low voice. "What did you say?" Edith asked coldly. "No, ahem, nothing." Cole hurriedly waved his hand. "I wanted to ask, after the meeting, did you talk to Andrea about this? What if you guessed wrong?" She raised her eyebrows. "You saw it? I wanted to ask when you'd come back, but it seemed that you only stayed in front of her for a short period of time, because I don't need to say all these speculations. Since it's an emotional card, I just need to give it a little push." Edith said carelessly, "His Majesty is a very benevolent king. Besides, he's met Sir Otto once. As long as you ask, he'll most likely agree to save Andrea. I just mentioned it. If I guessed correctly, it would be considered as helping His Majesty. If I guessed wrong..." She paused for a moment. Who cares about the life or death of a noble from the Kingdom of Dawn? The next day, the regular meeting ended after only half a day. Roland Wimbledon, who had been silent for 3 days, did not continue to listen to the discussions of the ministers. Instead, he announced his decision at the beginning of the meeting. Neverwinter's army would be divided into 2 groups. One group would enter the Hermes Plateau from Coldwind Ridge, while the other group would pass through the eastern region and directly reach the border of the Kingdom of Dawn. They would attack the Kingdom of Dawn from the west and the south respectively and strive to join forces in the City of Glow by the end of summer and the beginning of autumn. As soon as this decree was announced, everyone stopped arguing and accepted the order in unison. Even Barav, who was the leader of the Conservative Party, put his hand on his chest and accepted the order as if he had never said anything. Chapter 852. 1, 2, 3, 4. Lorgar poured the golden dragon out of the bag on the table and carefully counted it twice. She could not help but frown. 21. In less than half a month, she had used up 3/4 of her savings. At this rate, she would have to return home dejectedly in a week or 2, throwing all her lofty words and lofty aspirations into the quicksand. The cost of living in a big city was too exaggerated. Especially that Evelyn's 100 Flavors winery, it was simply outrageous. Even a group of robbers with knives would not be as. No, that's not right. Lorgar lowered her head dejectedly and let out a whimper. Her ears also drooped down. They did not rob her openly. It was she who took out the golden dragon from the bag and willingly handed it over to the other party. In particular, the owner of the winery had repeatedly expressed his concern that her expenses were too high. He had tried to persuade her several times, saying that as long as she joined the Witch Union, she would be able to get a free drink every month, but she had not listened to him at all. It was she who was defeated by her own desire. Or rather, curiosity. But she really could not be blamed for this. The chaos drinks were like magic. Even Chunlu in the Archura Oasis did not taste so good. She could not even find the words to describe their taste. But without exception, each of the colors of the drinks was incomparable. The name, 100 Flavors, was well-deserved. If it was only a single variety, even if it was the 3 gods' best wine, she was confident that she could control herself. After all, the right amount of drinks was beneficial to a warrior, but excessive drinking was tantamount to self-destruction. But the chaos drinks had too many variations. She always could not help but want to try what the next cup tasted like. Unconsciously, the golden dragon was spent like running water. Lorgar turned her head from side to side in annoyance, rubbing her forehead against the cold table, trying to wake herself up. No, she could not go on like this. As long as she stayed in the city, she could not help but want to go to the tavern. To be honest, apart from the shockingly expensive drinks, it was a good place to broaden one's horizons and gather information. She found a random place to sit down, and she could hear the conversations of merchants from all over the northern kingdom. Unlike those traveling merchants in the southernmost region, most of them were of high status, and the things they talked about were quite fresh. It could be said that she benefited a lot from their conversations. Another advantage was that she could occasionally meet other witches of the same kind and learn some inside information about the witch union. Unfortunately, her remaining savings did not allow her to continue waiting for an opportunity. She had to act. In order to overcome this desire, fighting outside the city was the most effective choice. The temporary departure from Neverwinter could make her stay away from the variegated winehouse, and the battle could make her forget everything. The wolf girl closed her eyes. She could not help but think of the long sand road. That's right, this was definitely a challenge given to her by the three gods. Thinking of this, she felt a lot more refreshed. Patting her cheeks, Lorgar put the golden dragon into her bag and turned over to pack up. She did not spend all of her time in the variegated winehouse. First, through Ash's help, she visited her savior, Miss Nana Pine, and learned an important piece of news. There were 3 witches in Neverwinter with healing abilities, namely, Nana, Lily, and Leaf. They were not owned by the Great Chief alone. Instead, they opened a medical center, and the local residents only needed to pay a fee to receive treatment, which was much cheaper than chaos drinks. In other words, even if she did not work for the Great Chief, she could still get a stable treatment, which was more ideal than she had initially expected. In addition, although Miss Nana's healing ability was the strongest, it could only take effect in person, while Lily and Leaf's abilities could be given to objects. For example, the special golden sore medicine, which had the ability to quickly stop bleeding, was made by Miss Leaf, although Lorgar did not know what the small bottle of gray powder in her hand had to do with the golden dragon. The potion made by Lily was called Purification Potion, which looked no different from ordinary well water, but had the effect of blocking the erosion of diseases, which was in line with the word purification. When the wound was exposed, the disease was often more likely to kill the warrior than blood loss and pain. Therefore, she naturally understood the value of this kind of medicine. If it were not for the shelf life, she would definitely buy all the potions she saw. These 2 kinds of medicine could be bought in the medical center, and the price was not high relative to its function. It was undoubtedly the best guarantee for warriors to challenge higher peaks. As long as it was used properly, she was full of confidence to defeat strong enemies. Secondly, Princess Lorgar of the Wild Flame clan found that the adventure skills she had mastered in the north were not useful. There was no rat organization in Neverwinter, as the traveling merchants had mentioned, and the residents seemed to know nothing about demons. She asked dozens of people, and all the answers were, "I don't know," which also attracted some black-clothed men to follow her. Now, her understanding of demons was still limited to what Ashes had revealed to her and a conversation she overheard in the Byway Winehouse. There was an abandoned city in the desert to the north of Neverwinter, and the demons seemed to have appeared there. According to her past experience, she should not easily attack when there was such a lack of information. But now she urgently needed to get rid of the temptation of the chaos drinks, and at the same time, prove herself to the Great Chief, so she had to adapt to the situation. Since it was a challenge, it must be full of dangers and setbacks. She was fully prepared in her heart. Out of the border of Neverwinter, Lorgar found an uninhabited dense forest, took off her clothes, transformed into a giant wolf, and then flew all the way north with her luggage in her mouth. She did not know the specific location of the abandoned city, nor did she know whether she could encounter demons, but desert wolves had extremely sharp hearing and smell. For her, the wild was not much more dangerous than human settlements. In the past, in the southernmost region, she used this ability to find well-hidden opponents again and then destroy them. She believed it would be the same this time. Feeling the melted snow and mud under her feet, Lorgar even had a vague feeling that the 3 gods would guide her to meet the real enemy. However, before she could run far, she suddenly heard a whistling sound in the air rapidly approaching. Something was swooping down on her. This kind of air-tearing warning was quite familiar. In the holy duel on the burning platform, the 4-winged eagle launched a surprise attack in this way. She might not have been able to dodge such a swift attack before, but now she had enough experience to deal with everything. An excellent Sand Nation warrior would never be hit by the same attack twice. Lorgar exerted strength on one leg and suddenly rolled to one side. At the same time, She turned her body 90 degrees so that she could see the direction of the attacker. Then she inserted her thick and powerful hind legs into the mud. Her muscles were already stretched to the maximum, and her sharp claws stretched out of her flesh pads. As long as the enemy's attack missed, it would lead to a fatal counterattack. A giant beast with the momentum of thunder hit the place where she was originally standing, splashing a large amount of snow and water. Its broad wings were even more amazing than the four-winged eagle's, and the ground seemed to tremble with the impact. At the same time, there was a cry of surprise, as if he was surprised that his attack had missed. Chapter 853. A flying monster with hairless wings, ferocious and ugly in appearance, wild and fierce in strength, and a strange voice that seemed to have been heard somewhere before. Wait, doesn't this inexplicably familiar voice come from the white pigeon that was particularly intimate with Ashes? Lorgar suddenly thought of an image she had been imagining for a long time. Could this be the real Maggie? Maggie! She shouted subconsciously. The wolf can actually speak. The giant beast let out a strange cry and took a few steps back, which made the wolf girl freeze in place. For a moment, she did not know whether she should pounce on it or not. Although she did not know why the other party launched a sneak attack, it was also a good opportunity for a competition. But when she saw the giant beast's panic-stricken face, she began to wonder who was the one being attacked. It's a witch, stupid. Suddenly, another voice came from above, crisp with a hint of childishness. Who are you? Why do you know us? Lorgar looked up and could not help but squint slightly. It turned out that there was another person floating in the air, whose position overlapped with the sun. The dazzling sunlight bloomed around her, and she could only vaguely see her flying short blonde hair and the silver weapon in her hand. Although this guy looked quite young, he was unexpectedly rich in combat experience. The skill of turning his back to the sun to dazzle the opponent was not something an ordinary person could master. Since there was no intention of a competition, Lorgar also stopped. Although she liked challenges, she was not the kind of rude person who would pester the other party regardless of whether they were willing or not. Moreover, Ashes had warned her that Maggie's enemies will eventually be in big trouble. It was better to avoid trouble on the road of practicing alone. She put down the bag in her mouth and changed back to human form. I'm Lorgar Burnflame from the desert. I came here with Ashes and Andrea. On the way here, she mentioned. Well, Maggie. I remember. The giant beast's body also rapidly shrank, and in the blink of an eye, she became a tiny little thing only up to her waist, and her snow-white hair almost reached the ground. I saw this person when I went to pick up Ashes. Coo! She didn't mention me? The little girl cried discontentedly. Your name is? Lightning, the greatest explorer in the western region. No, the greatest explorer in the whole Grey Castle. She said and then dived down and landed in front of the wolf girl. Remember? Coo! Why did you take off your clothes? Maggie curiously looked at her chest, and then touched her own. Is this also a conjuration? Lightning withdrew her hand from Maggie's head. It's just a difference in ability, you don't need to stare at her. Lorgar put on her coat. Then why did you attack me? I thought you were a mutated snow wolf. She put away her confident expression and said a little embarrassedly, cleaning up the demonic beasts that are still wandering in the barbarian land, bringing fresh prey for the castle, and monitoring the entire northwest. These are all our jobs. There's also bird nests, beehives, and roasted game. Coo! That's not a job. Lightning quickly interrupted. Anyway, almost no one comes to this area, and the months of demons just passed, so. I see. Lorgar nodded and accepted the explanation. She had heard more than once that the border of the Northern Kingdom would become dangerous during the months of demons. After the battle with the four-winged eagle, she had also learned a lot of information about hybrid demonic beasts from Ashes. If she was patrolling in the air, it would not be strange for the huge desert wolf to be a wolf-shaped demonic beast. What about you? The little girl asked. This is the barbarian land. There are not only remnants of demonic beasts, but also more terrible things. What do you want to do here alone? More terrible things. Do you mean demons? Princess Lorger said calmly. If so, it proves that I'm in the right place. Do you know about demons, Ku? I'm looking for an abandoned city. I heard that they have appeared there. She paused. I want to hunt them. Lightning was stunned for a moment, and then showed a strange expression, as if she was deliberately suppressing her laughter. Who told you that? What's wrong? Lorger sensed that something was wrong. It's been more than 400 years since the demons appeared in Tequila. Lightning grinned. Of course, they can come back at any time. We patrol this area to prevent such a situation from happening. But if we want to reach the abandoned city, it will take at least 7 or 8 days. And the barbarian land is so big. If we deviate a little, we won't be able to see the city. You know, this place was originally called the Fertile Plains. It's bigger than the whole of Grey Castle. No, it's bigger than the 4 kingdoms combined. Is that so? The wolf girl could not help but frown. She was not worried about the long journey. In the past, when she practiced her skills, she could stay in the wild for a month or 2. It did not matter if there were no demons for the time being. She had always been patient when hunting, and living in the wild, she did not have to worry about spending all her golden dragon unknowingly. However, if this place was really as big as she said, it would be troublesome not to find the target. But the courage and adventurous spirit you showed is commendable, Lightning said with her hands on her hips. You set foot on the road of exploration with only a few words. This is the potential of an excellent explorer. Although I don't know why you didn't join the Witch Union, it's the same if you join the Neverwinter Exploration Group. So, do you want to explore this misty land with us? Let's roast some game together, Ku. Maggie raised her hands high. No thanks. Lorger could not help but sigh in her heart. At this time, she found that some things were not as she had expected. For example, Maggie was indeed very strong after transforming, at least as strong as a 4-winged eagle, but her mind was completely different from that of a warrior. She came here to climb to the top, not to play with a child. Forget it. I'll take my time to explore this plane. Maybe this is also a challenge arranged by the 3 gods. Wait. Just as the wolf girl was about to set off again, Lightning's words stopped her. If you join the Neverwinter Exploration Group, I can take you to the Tequila Ruins. You've been there? Lorger's ears pricked up. Chapter 854. As night fell, the shadow from the direction of the impassable mountain range gradually shrouded them like a growing ridge. Eventually, it merged with the sky and completely engulfed the brown and green land. It was the first time for Lorger to see such a scene. When flying in the sky, even a giant like Maggie could only cast a small shadow on the mountains, rivers, and fields. When the shadow behind them nibbled at them, it seemed slow, but there was nowhere for them to escape. No matter how fast they flew, it was useless. She had a deeper understanding of the vastness of the barbarian land. Lightning approached them and whistled. Let's land. We're here. Oh. The giant beast began to fall, and the wolf girl on its back suddenly felt herself floating. The feeling of falling made her a little flustered, and her hands involuntarily grasped the fur. Before long, the 3 of them landed on a small hill. This is the secret base of the exploration group. Lightning waved her hand. Follow me. The little girl suddenly disappeared after going around a huge tree stump. Lin Sanjia followed and found that the tree stump was actually hollow. There was a small door on the side facing the steep slope, and there were piles of firewood and simple stone chairs inside. Even if we fly to Tequila, it'll still take us 2 days. Let's spend the night here and set off tomorrow morning. Lightning opened the window opposite the door and let the wind flow. The rotten smell in the trunk immediately dissipated a lot. Now it's time to barbecue. Have a taste of my cooking. Did you build this place? Lorger looked around curiously. In the end, she had accepted the invitation and joined the so-called Neverwinter Exploration Group. After all, in addition to the little girl's promise to take her to the abandoned city, the information about the demons just happened to scratch her itch. The more she knew about the enemy, the more advantageous it would be for her in future battles. She had no choice but to set off without detailed information. Now that she had a reliable source of information, she had to make a little sacrifice. I'll just take it as accompanying the two little fellows for a while. It can't be considered as building. I just found a naturally created residence. Lightning quickly set up a bonfire and lit up the interior of the stump. Worms had eaten through it, and the upper half had collapsed in the wind and rain. The branches and leaves just happened to fill the trunk, forming a natural roof. As for the window and the door, they were chiseled by Maggie. There are many places like this in the barbarian wasteland. As long as you are careful enough, explorers will never lack a place to shelter them from the wind and rain. Unexpectedly, she felt that the other party's answer was reliable. Under the flickering light of the fire, Lorgar noticed that there were bolts nailed to the back of the simple doors and windows to effectively prevent uninvited guests from breaking in. Above the bonfire, there was a smoke vent that could be opened and closed. Obviously, it could also be used to escape in an emergency. The firewood was placed on higher ground to avoid being soaked by water. There were also 2 drainage ditches dug on the ground that led to the outside. So, although there was a rotten smell, it did not feel wet. There were many similar details, and it didn't seem like something an underage child would be able to grasp. For a moment, she was a little confused about the details of the exploration group. Maggie hummed a tuneless coo song while taking out jerky from her backpack and roasting it over the bonfire. Lightning took out a variety of seasoning jars from her waist and sprinkled them evenly on the surface of the jerky. The two cooperated very well. Obviously, it was not the first time they had done this. Soon, a tempting aroma spread through the trunk. "Eat it." Lightning handed her a skewer of roasted meat. Lorgar took the roasted meat, hesitated for a moment, and then slowly put it into her mouth. A rich and delicious taste suddenly gushed out. First, the warm grease stuck to her mouth, then the saltiness brought by the spices, and finally the thin shredded meat that was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. It was hard to imagine that this was a delicacy that could be enjoyed in the wild. Even the best banquets in Iron Sand City did not taste as good as this. She could not help but shake her tail and exhale a lingering fragrance from her throat. Good, delicious. Of course, this is not ordinary jerky coo, Maggie said proudly. It was originally a giant lake frog in the Great Snow Mountain Ice Spring. It took me a lot of effort to catch it. Its leg is as big as Lightning's, so I had to pickle it and eat it slowly. The wolf girl was stunned. Lake frog? What's that? Can it really be eaten? Don't worry. The little girl seemed to have read her mind. Explorers exist to explore the unknown, and novel food is also one of them. Lorgar pursed her lips, but in the end she still could not bear to put down the half piece of jerky. She closed her eyes and swallowed it. After savoring the aftertaste between her lips and teeth, she looked at Lightning and asked, "Are there only 2 of you in the Neverwinter exploration group?" "Now there are 3 of us," Lightning corrected. "What about the other members of the Witch Union? Why do you want to invite me to join?" Princess Lorgar thought for a moment and chose to speak frankly. "I came to the Western region to challenge strong enemies and hone my skills. I'm not interested in exploring the unknown." Lightning was silent for a moment, which was rare for her. Because they rarely leave Neverwinter. Even if they do, they don't like to wander around in the wild. They have more important things to do than exploring, such as staying in the factory to produce those machines. My father once said that a person can't complete a real adventure alone. If you want to become a great explorer, you have to form your own team, and you're the only witch I've met in the barbarian land. This girl is serious. Lorgar suddenly realized that the exploration group was not just an excuse she made up on the spur of the moment. She really wanted to do it. However, judging from her slightly lonely tone, she guessed that not many people would take her words seriously. They would just treat it as a joke from a little girl, just as Lorgar had thought. For a moment, she saw a trace of herself in the wolf girl. Before she defeated all the challenges and became a real warrior, few people could understand her passion and dedication to fighting. Even in Iron Sand City, female warriors were still a very small part of the population. Thinking of this, the wolf girl could not help but sigh softly. She pretended to be helpless and said, "Since I'm also a member of the exploration group, what do I need to do next?" Lightning's eyes lit up. She took out a sheepskin map from her pocket and handed it to Lorgar. The nearby unexplored areas are marked on this map. If you happen to pass by, you can draw the novelty you find on it: bird's nest, beehive, wolf's cave, anything will do. But you can't sneak around alone. This is the first rule of the exploration group. You have to wait for us to come back before eating together. Maggie interrupted. Lorgar unfolded the map and saw all kinds of strange patterns drawn on it. There were also a lot of annotations on the side. For example, where the eagle's nest was written, there were 2 chicken legs and 4 eggs. Lorgar did not know whether to laugh or cry. Why do I feel like I've been cheated? Ahem, okay, I see. She put away the map. But what do you mean by waiting for you to come back? Are you going to leave Neverwinter? Chapter 855. After a good night's sleep, the 3 of them set off again the next day. After flying for half a day, Lorgar finally saw the abandoned city in front of her. She held her breath involuntarily. This city is too big. Looking from the sky, the land under their feet was a vast expanse of green, with grayish-brown walls and broken walls among the green fields. According to Lightning, the city had been abandoned 400 years ago, but even now, the outline of its incomplete walls could still be seen. Based on the size of the ruins, this city was larger than 5 or 6 iron sand cities put together and could accommodate more than 100,000 people. Even if it was now a pile of broken ruins, she could still feel the original grandeur of the city. Based on the ratio of 1 to 10, the population of the surrounding towns and villages that supported the city, did it mean that this wilderness used to have nearly 1 million people? This was too inconceivable. How could a kingdom that could build such a big city lose to the demons? Lorgar could not help thinking of His Majesty's words. The Battle of Divine Will was not a small fight between 2 tribes, but an all-out war to determine the survival of the 2 civilizations. At first, she was quite indignant, but now she suddenly understood. Now that she thought about it, His Majesty's "I don't want you to die" was no longer a deliberate threat. Somehow, the wolf girl suddenly felt much better. Lightning made a gesture, and the 3 of them descended and finally landed on a relatively intact section of the city wall. The mottled top of the wall was about 20 steps wide, enough for 2 4-wheeled carriages to travel side by side. On the wall that was covered in moss and vines, a few circular holes could be vaguely seen. It was unknown how much force was needed to leave such a mark on the giant stone. "You should already know." The little girl came over and said, this was originally the last line of defense of the Witch Empire. Unfortunately, they failed to resist the demon's attack. In other words, the witches that Ashes had mentioned, who could live for more than 400 years and would never die, were actually the surviving members of the Witch Empire? Was it because of their destruction that the current 4 kingdoms and the church that regarded witches as heretics came into existence? The wolf girl did not ask what was on her mind. Since she had never heard the traveling merchants talk about this period of history, and even the residents of Neverwinter knew nothing about it, it could only be that those who knew about it did not want to spread the news. She always remembered that she was not a member of the Witch Union, so there were some things that she did not need to know too much. She took out the map that Lightning had given her yesterday and spread it out in front of her. Tequila is the border area that you usually scout. If the demons want to attack Neverwinter, which direction do they usually come from? It's possible to go to the west of the ruins, but it'll be very dangerous if we want to go deeper into the barbarian land. Even staying in the air might not be safe. But, she asked. Because of the fog, cried Maggie. Sometimes the sky turns red. Coo. Lorgar frowned. It's a necessity for the demons to survive, just like the air we breathe. Lightning looked to the northwest. Today's weather is good, so the sky looks blue. But sometimes when it's rainy, especially when the sky is overcast, you can see the red fog at the edge of the horizon when you fly high. It's highly toxic to witches. Even if you don't inhale it, just touching it can cause serious damage. Because we don't know how far it can float, We rarely go beyond the tequila line. Then the little girl roughly explained the demon's weaknesses. I see. The wolf girl twitched her ears. As long as we pull out the tubes behind them, the demons can only be slaughtered. But it's not easy to do. Like the senior demons I mentioned last night, they almost have no flaws. Lightning warned. If you really encounter the enemy, you'd better retreat immediately and inform His Majesty. Don't worry. I know what I'm doing. Lorgar patted her chest and said, full of fighting spirit. It was true that the enemy was terrifying, but it was also because of this that the challenge was worthwhile. Moreover, the strength of a group did not mean that an individual could not be defeated. She believed that as long as she found the right opportunity, she could always hunt down a lone target. Even if the demons did not appear for the time being, she could still use hybrid demonic beasts as a substitute. She had seen several large demonic beasts in the forest when she flew on Maggie's back. Looking at the desolate wilderness, Lorgar felt that she had found the feeling of moving forward again. Green replaced the yellow sand, but the road became clearer and began to extend further. I'm going to stay here for a long time, she thought. Since the order to go to war was issued, Roland had to hold 1 or 2 meetings almost every day. He had to agree to everything, be it the battle strategy or the logistics. At first, he enjoyed the feeling of being in control, but as the content became deeper and more complicated, he felt that he could not bear it anymore. With the development of Neverwinter, the area of control was no longer a city. Plans and reports that could be completed by one person had now become the responsibility of a large team. In the face of these trivial contents, Roland gradually understood and sympathized with the mentality of those incapable emperors who did not like to deal with government affairs and history. Think about it, every day you had to listen to people nagging about reports that you could not remember for half a day, and after a long time, you would naturally feel uncomfortable. If it were not for Scroll who integrated and filtered the numbers in the plan for him, he would probably want to be a hands-off boss and leave everything to his subordinates. After all, he was just a mechanical engineer before he traveled to this world. Compared with the complicated logistics, Roland paid more attention to the battle strategy drawn up by the Ministry of Defense. The main direction of the First Army's attack was undoubtedly the holy city of Hermes, which had high walls and thick city walls. Not only did they have enough cannons and ammunition, but they also used the experience accumulated from the exploration of the Snow Mountain, in which the army, witches, and tequila survivors would act together. Roland had to admit that the Pearl of the Northern region had shown her proud talent. In this plan, she mentioned the concept of cooperative warfare, such as using the abilities of witches and tequila survivors to launch surprise attacks from all directions, so that the enemy would not be able to deal with each other. She also included the sky and the ground into the attack range. Although many of the ideas were not mature yet, for this era, it was already extraordinary to have such foresight. It seemed that it was indeed a good choice to put her in the Ministry of Defense. Of course, in order to implement these plans smoothly, the key was to ensure that the tequila gods' punishment witches were willing to follow orders, and not act on their own when they received orders. In the days when everyone was busy preparing for the war, this was the first problem that Roland had to solve. And the method was extraordinarily simple and clear. Chapter 856. Roland was already familiar with the process of entering the dream world. As long as he thought about the unique things in the dream world before closing his eyes, he would be able to trigger the beam of light that went straight to the sky. After that, he would wake up naturally and welcome the morning of another world. However, there was a small accident this time. He did not wake up naturally. Instead, he was awakened by a series of phone rings. Fortunately, this kind of sleep was not real sleep, so he did not feel sleepy. Roland turned over and got up. He picked up his cell phone from the bedside table and found that it was Garcia calling. Hey, do you know what time it is? It's 6:30. It's not too early, Garcia interrupted. And how do I know whether your relatives will suddenly visit? Roland could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth. It seemed that Garcia still remembered that he stood her up last time. What's up? Haven't you always wanted to know what the erosion is about? The association has set a time for the new members to visit. It will be this afternoon. After breakfast, you can come to 0827. Didn't you say afternoon? You're not the only new member. It will take time to meet with people from other districts. Garcia raised her voice. But are you going out with your relatives today? And more than one. Of course, he knew that if he answered like this, Garcia would definitely block the door. Besides, he was really curious about the erosion that Garcia mentioned. Okay, but I slept a little late last night, so, I might smell a little bit. Let me take a shower first. She fell silent. Even through the phone, Roland could feel the disdain coming from the other side of the phone. Finally, Garcia said, "Please hurry up," and hung up the phone. Now he had to hurry up. Roland put on his clothes and walked into the living room. Zero was busy in the kitchen. She was wholeheartedly frying eggs and waving the spatula in her hand. Her movements could almost make people forget that she was just a junior high school student. "Good morning," he greeted her. "I'm going out for a while. I'll be back soon." Zero showed a suspicious expression. "Uncle, are you going to do morning exercises?" "Sort of," he said casually. "By the way, there's a staff meeting in the afternoon. I might come back a little late. You don't have to wait for me to have lunch with you." "I know," said the little girl, pouting. Outside the tube-shaped apartment, the neighborhood was already bustling with activity. White steam was rising from the rice noodle shops along the street, and the breakfast stalls were sizzling with the sound of deep-fried dough sticks being put into the pot. Even though it was already late autumn and people were wearing thicker clothes, there were still many elderly morning joggers around the building. They wore short-sleeved shirts and sports pants, and they walked briskly to the sound of the radio and the hawkers. Their movements were not much slower than those of young men. Roland turned into an alley not far from the tube-shaped apartment and stopped in front of a shop that hadn't opened yet. The rental notice on the shop front was quite eye-catching, but in front of the word rent, there was a big word, taken. He took out the key and opened the side door. When he walked into the room, more than 20 witches who were standing inside knelt down on one knee and saluted in unison, "Your Majesty." For a moment he felt like he was back in Neverwinter. Although they were separated by only a wall, it felt like a lifetime had passed. "Welcome to the dream world," Roland said with a nod. "Do you mean we have a special task today?" On the second floor of the shop, Phyllis, Faldy, Ling, and Tongan gathered around Roland and listened to him carefully. As the first batch of pioneers to enter the dream world, they had a certain understanding of this world, so they had become the guides for the other tequila survivors. Whether it was eating, drinking, or hunting fallen evils, they could take care of and guide the others, which greatly relieved Roland of a lot of burden. This shop was the new foothold that he had rented with the help of a middleman. Compared with the previous warehouse, this place was much more spacious and less suspicious. Roland repeated the notice from the Martialist Association. According to Garcia, when the association organizes newcomers to learn the inside story, they'll bring them to the headquarters. The specific location of this place has always been unknown to outsiders, so I want to take this opportunity to find the base where they hide the force of nature. I need your help to do that. Let my bug follow you. Faldy summoned the magic bug nest and picked up a beetle to pinch on her fingertip. That way, I'll know your location at all times. After getting his consent, the witch placed the beetle on his collar. The beetle quickly crawled into his long hair and hid itself. Roland could only vaguely feel that there was something extra on the back of his neck. "Phyllis and Ling will follow me." Roland suppressed his discomfort and turned to look at the other two witches. "Do you remember how to take a taxi?" Phyllis nodded and said, "Wave your hand and tell the driver to keep an eye on the one in front and pay him when we arrive. Don't talk when you're driving. Keep silent no matter what the driver asks." Ling patted her chest and added, "Don't worry, Your Majesty. We remember it very well." "That's good," Roland said approvingly. "When the car stops, Ling, see if you can sneak in. Although there's no God's stone of retaliation in this world, I don't know if the Martialist Association has any other means to interfere with the operation of magic power. If you can't do it, don't force yourself." Your most important task is to hide yourself, understand? Yes, Your Majesty, the three witches said in unison. Then, Your Majesty, what about me? Dawnin pointed at herself expectantly. You stay here and take care of the Tequila Sisters. Roland took out 10 $100 bills from his wallet and handed them to Dawnin. This is for the takeout, including breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Postpone the entertainment scheduled for tomorrow. Hey, but I'm also good at sneaking in, Dawnin said reluctantly. It's exactly because you're good at sneaking in that I need you to stay here. If anything happens, you're the only one who can evacuate without attracting attention. Roland patted her shoulder and said, Of course, if you've settled everyone down, I'll take you to the cinema next time. I got it. Hearing the word special, Dawnin immediately became energetic again. Please leave it to me. He had asked the 4 witches to call for takeout before, and the Tequila Witches' outstanding ability to learn quickly helped them master this skill. As long as one of them stayed here, there should not be any big mistakes. Chapter 857. After explaining everything, Roland returned to the apartment as fast as he could, only to find that he had underestimated Garcia's vigilance. He saw a familiar figure leaning against the corridor at the entrance of apartment 0825. She was talking on the phone while overlooking the busy crowd downstairs. She was wearing a gray and white t-shirt, loose black trousers, and a pair of high-top sneakers, which made her look youthful and energetic. If Roland did not know her real identity, he would have thought that she was a lively and cheerful girl next door that often appeared on TV. Although he could see a little anger on her face, she was not as cold and mean as he remembered. After taking off the gorgeous brocade robe, this casual and simple sportswear unexpectedly matched the Princess of Wimbledon, who used to be the Queen of Clearwater. Garcia noticed Roland when he was about to reach the door. That's it. I have something to do. I have to hang up. If you want to persuade me in the future, please don't call me again. The Clovers are here to talk about the demolition again? Roland asked, pretending that nothing had happened. It's none of your business. She put away the phone and looked suspicious. Where have you been? Didn't you say you wanted to take a shower? Do you know how to get rid of the smell? One is to wash it, and the other is to cover it up with another smell, he said calmly. The girl who lives in my house needs to go to school and needs to use the bathroom. I can't fight with her, can I? So I thought I might as well run a few laps and sweat a little. No wonder martialists always look clean. Well, that's not important. What's important is that I didn't sneak away. I'm standing right in front of you, isn't that right? That's not important. Garcia stared at him for a while and then said, I don't want to interfere with your private life, but it's not good for you to indulge yourself too much. Besides, there's also the problem of education. Roland was surprised. Those girls, Garcia frowned. The ones who left your house. Can't you do it outside? Do you have to bring them home? I thought you forgot that there's an underage girl living in the house. Roland almost choked on his words. In order to hide it from Zero, he deliberately let the Tequila Witches disconnect their consciousness and enter the dream world after the little fellow went to school. As for whether other people saw it or not, it did not matter. However, when it came out of Garcia's mouth, the meaning was completely different. It's true that some martialists will become less restrained after becoming famous. Money and fame always make people lose themselves, but don't forget that we're fighting for this world. We must always maintain a high fighting spirit and never slack off. Indulging in desire will only make your skills dull. Ahem, I understand. Roland saw that she was about to start a moral education, so he quickly interrupted her. We can talk about this later. Can you let me change first? Don't delay the departure time. Garcia shut her mouth unhappily and glared at him. Go ahead. After a while, Roland deliberately put on his newly purchased suit and walked out of the door under Zero's surprised gaze. Before leaving, he did not forget to put the fried eggs made by the little girl into a fresh-keeping bag, ready to enjoy them on the way. Garcia, who was guarding the door, blinked. It's my first time going to the headquarters, so it's better to be formal. Roland shrugged and said, This counts as entering the system. It's a bit disrespectful if I'm too casual. What do you think? Oh, whatever. She shook her head. But I didn't expect you to actually look good dressed like this. Of course, you get what you pay for, Roland thought to himself. This custom-made suit had cost him a lot of robbery fees. After all, clothes make the man. As long as he was not hopelessly ugly, he would instantly look good after dressing up and putting on a set of well-ironed clothes. Moreover, this body was well-proportioned. Coupled with his long gray hair, if he were in his original world, people would even believe that he was an elf prince. The two went downstairs and walked out of the neighborhood. After waiting for a while on the street, a large bus stopped in front of them. Roland noticed that this bus did not have a license plate and the windows were covered by black curtains, so he could not see what was going on inside. "Get on," Garcia said in a low voice. Roland did not know whether it was an illusion or not, but she looked much more serious. When boarding the bus, Roland pretended to casually glance at the side of the street and saw that Phyllis had already stopped a taxi. After the door was closed, he saw that the bus was not as dark as he had imagined. The lights on both sides of the aisle were all lit, and there were many people sitting on the seats. Most of them were dressed in various styles, and they looked like a group of performance artists. Only a few of them looked normal, and they were all immersed in their own things. No one greeted Garcia. On the other hand, Roland keenly noticed that ever since he got on the car, a few guys had their eyes on him, and it was obvious that they had bad intentions. Without saying a word, Garcia took Roland's hand and led him to the back of the bus. "Aren't these your colleagues?" Roland asked in a low voice after sitting down. "The Martialist Association isn't a company." Garcia rolled her eyes at him. "Most of the people on the bus are like you, new awakened ones. It's the first time I've seen them." "So many?" Roland was slightly surprised. He roughly counted and found that there were about 20 people in the bus. "It's a lot." "The last time I went to the association, there were only 5 or 6 people. But it's not strange," Garcia replied. "Although ordinary people know nothing about the changes in the world, the awakened with the force of nature can always sense something strange. Do you remember what I said before? Not all the awakened will be on our side. There are no fewer awakened ones than the association's martialists. Now that the erosion has intensified and more fallen evils have appeared, they are in a more and more dangerous situation. In the future, more and more people will join the association. So most of the people on the bus are wild martialists or rogue cultivators." "That's a good description." Garcia raised the corner of her mouth. "I guess it's very likely. But you can tell me in private, but don't say it in front of them. The reason why these people don't want to join the association is that they don't want to be restrained. If an ordinary person has the wrong mentality, it's easy for them to become arrogant and think that they are extraordinary. This not only hinders their progress, but also makes them very temperamental." "I've already felt that," Roland said casually. "There was such a conflict in the past. A wild martialist who joined the association killed several members of the association during a hunting mission, which caused a very bad influence. In the end, the defender appeared and eliminated them. So if they do anything provocative, just pretend that you didn't see it. This kind of behavior will be severely punished by the association." "Can wild awakened ones be so strong?" "These people are often attacked by fallen evils, so they are much more experienced in combat and have better judgment than new awakened ones. But as long as you practice hard and don't indulge in your desires, you'll grow much faster than them. After all, they're too busy with mundane affairs." At this point, Garcia sighed. "The force of nature is a means of self-protection given by God, not a tool to plunder others. If we can't stop the erosion, the whole world may cease to exist. Many people enjoy the pleasure brought by power, but they forget their responsibilities." This sentence sounds somewhat familiar. Roland thought for a moment. Maybe more than 800 years ago, those witches who were aware of the dangers of the demons established the union with the same mentality. After an unknown period of time, it suddenly became quiet outside the window. The friction between the wheels and the ground became deep and monotonous, as if they were driving alone in an empty tunnel. After another half an hour, the bus finally stopped. Just when Roland thought they had arrived at their destination, the bus trembled slightly, and then he felt a clear sense of weightlessness. Chapter 858. This is. Roland looked at Garcia. The elevator, Garcia replied proudly. Wait a moment. You'll see it soon. Not long after she said this, the indicator light beside the window jumped from red to green, and then the curtain automatically rose, revealing the scene outside the bus. Roland immediately understood the reason for the pride in her tone. The bus was parked on a huge iron plate, surrounded by concrete walls painted with yellow and black warning paint. 5 or 6 metal tracks were embedded in the walls, and the sound of gears grinding could be heard. Every time they descended a certain distance, they could see dazzling spotlights and huge numbers. In just a few minutes, they had descended more than 100 meters, and the numbers were still increasing. With the constantly rotating orange warning lights on the outer edge of the iron plate, this scene was like a scene in a science fiction movie. Being underground, he suddenly felt that the third border city he had built was overshadowed. Compared to this magnificent way of entry, the underground city, which still relied on hemp ropes and steam engines to transport people, was almost no different from the urban-rural fringe. In his mind, the strength of the association, which could build such a facility, suddenly rose by several levels. Without strong economic and political strength, it was absolutely impossible for a group of martialists to achieve such a magnificent project. No wonder Garcia was so proud of it. Even those wild awakened ones with strange tempers were shocked by this scene. There was a lot of discussion in the carriage. Everyone couldn't help but look out the window, as if they wanted to find out how deep this place was hidden. This is a good show of strength, Roland thought to himself. The curtains were probably closed to prevent the newcomers from knowing the specific location of the headquarters, but after entering the underground, they were not afraid. Instead of letting people admire this magnificent project, it was better to say that they were demonstrating the strength of the association. He just didn't know whether Ling, who was following them, could find a chance to sneak in. When the number turned to 235, the iron plate finally stopped descending, and several tunnels appeared on the wall. The bus started again and drove into one of the tunnels. This time, it only took them a short distance to reach the destination. Roland followed Garcia out of the car, only to find that in front of him was a very wide underground square, densely lined with lights, almost as bright as daytime. If not for the previous experience, it would be hard for him to believe that he was deep underground. A statue stood in the middle of the square. At first glance, it looked like a large hand holding an irregular polyhedron. There were several buses parked next to the statue. It seemed that they were not the only newcomers here. Are those people from other cities? Roland pointed at the crowd surrounding the statue. Garcia nodded. The association has countless branches, but there are only 2 headquarters. If you want to get close to the erosion, you have to go to these 2 headquarters. He was slightly taken aback. The corrosion from the outside world can be seen directly? Not only can you see it, but you can also touch it. Although you will never want to touch it. Garcia rolled her eyes at him. Do you think we are a cult that will make people fight for their lives just because we have a big pie in the sky? The original purpose of visiting the headquarters is to gather newcomers from time to time and take them to see the real crisis that the world is facing. If you don't see it with your own eyes, you won't believe it. The disaster is close at hand. Just then, the lights above them suddenly dimmed, and darkness rushed in from all directions, focusing people's vision on a narrow area in the middle of the square. Like a stage with a curtain pulled open, 2 bright beams of light sprinkled down from the dome. One fell on the statue, and the other reflected the figure of a woman in black. She stood on a high platform on one side of the square. She was about 30 years old, dressed in a classical martial arts suit, and her long black hair was tied up on top of her head. One of her eyes seemed to have suffered an old injury and was covered by an eye patch. Although the force of nature in the dream world was not limited to men and women, it did not have the effect of changing one's appearance like magic power. In terms of appearance, she was no different from ordinary people. She was not tall, but she had a calm and solemn aura. The woman waved to the crowd and said loudly, "Good morning, awakened ones. I am Lon, the chief disciple of Defender Rock. Welcome to Prism City." Prism. Does she mean the polyhedron on the statue? Roland noticed that the wild martialists who came with him were whispering to each other. They seemed to be quite dissatisfied with her words. Before he had time to ask Garcia, Lon continued, "Of course, the Defender should be responsible for welcoming new disciples. Unfortunately, there was some trouble in Sky City, so Master and the other 3 Defenders left the day before yesterday. In order not to delay the tour, I have to welcome you. I know that some of you have awakened many years ago and can't be treated as real newcomers. But now that the situation has changed, you're willing to come here, which means you recognize the association's ability. Naturally, you should put aside everything in the past and put fighting against the fallen evils first. The association doesn't care about your past identity and status, only your future performance. The more critical the crisis, the more the awakened ones should unite. If you don't accept the association's approach, you can still choose to leave now." Saying this, the woman in black made a gesture of invitation, but no one in the square moved. Even the noisy discussion quieted down. This chief disciple is quite good. Roland curled his lips. As more and more fallen evils appeared, the wild awakened ones had applied to join the association when they could not even protect themselves. No matter how arrogant they were, they had to bow to reality at this moment. Lon had seen through this and deliberately retreated in order to advance. With just a few words, she had made these people speechless. Strength was always the only standard to convince the opponent. As a protector of the Martialist Association, it was undoubtedly the simplest and most effective way to persuade the opponent. Garcia looked at Roland with a complicated expression. After a long time, she whispered, "She's my master." What? He was stunned. "Master? She's the senior I mentioned the other day." Garcia sighed. "If it's not necessary, you'd better not hang around in front of her. Master hates irresponsible and unpunctual people." "Oh, I see." Chapter 859. Hearing the last sentence, Roland could not help but tremble. Why would there be a battle of divine will in the dream world? He glanced at Garcia, but her expression did not change. Roland did not know whether she already knew about it or did not care about it. Roland had no choice but to suppress his doubts and follow the crowd to the end of the square under the guidance of the light. At the end of the square, he found that there were many honeycomb-shaped passages embedded in the towering stone walls. Whether it was entering from the ground or transferring between the passages, they had to take the elevators hanging on the rails. He did not notice it when the square was brightly lit, but now that his field of vision was dim, he saw dozens of elevators going up and down like floating fireflies, which made him feel like he was in a futuristic city. However, although this design looked beautiful, it was extremely inconvenient to use. It would be fine if it was built in the city center as a landmark, but who would see it if it was buried underground? Once there was a fire, a power outage, or any other emergency, they would not know where to run. Of course, it was against common sense to build the headquarters underground. If it was just to prevent others from invading or to keep it a secret, it would not make sense. If it was not that the Martialist Association had too much money to spend, then there must be other reasons. After entering the 24th passage, Roland found that the ground under his feet was also a transmission ladder. As long as he stood still, it would automatically move forward. This kind of extravagance was simply astonishing. This place used to be a mine. The elevator passage on the wall is just an abandoned mine. Of course, some of them are newly excavated, which depends on the speed of erosion. Roland shrugged and said, "This place used to be a mine, and the elevator passage on the wall is just an abandoned mine." The erosion happened in the mine? Not exactly, but you can think so for the time being. So the association built the headquarters underground to prevent the erosion from spreading? Garcia showed a strange expression. No, nothing can prevent the erosion from spreading. The headquarters is not guarding against the erosion, but against the awakened with bad intentions. Seeing that Roland wanted to ask more, She shook her head gently. You'll understand when you see it. The passage soon led them to another hall, which was decorated like a staircase conference room. The floor dropped down until a podium was formed at the bottom. The security measures here were obviously much tighter. Martial artists wearing the same clothes could be seen everywhere. They stood expressionlessly on both sides of the hall, coldly staring at the newcomers, completely without any intention of welcoming them. Didn't they say that martial artists were straightforward, passionate, and unconstrained? Roland cursed in his heart. If this is how they treat new awakened ones, it's no wonder they don't want to join. After everyone was seated, the chief disciple, Lan, stepped onto the podium again. She did not say a word and directly lifted a curtain on the stage, revealing a huge glass box below. Roland could not help but frown. There was a dark red crystal in the box, floating in the center as if it was weightless. It reminded him of the magic core of tequila. However, the force of nature in the dream world was not as versatile as magic power. Moreover, this crystal did not seem to have any substance. It was more like a clumsy 3D projection. However, looking at Lan's serious expression, it did not seem that she was joking. This is erosion, Garcia said in a deep voice, or loopholes. What? Roland was stunned. The one on the stage is just a small part of it. She sighed softly. Our world is becoming riddled with holes. This is the essence of the erosion. I think some of you have already guessed or sensed. Lan glanced at the audience and said word by word, an evil force has entered our world. It has caused an endless number of fallen evils and seriously threatened the safety of the awakened ones. But I have to say that this idea is wrong. There has never been any evil force. It is just an overlay from another world. The audience burst into an uproar. What do you mean? Can you be more specific? What do you mean by another world? When did the Martialist Association become an Academy of Sciences? Then what are the fallen evils? Aliens? Completely different from the real newcomers, the awakened warriors did not care about Lan's identity as the chief disciple at all and directly shouted. Silence. Lan was unmoved. If you have anything to say, wait until the next show. As she said this, the glass box slowly rose up and exposed the crystal. Then 3 hanging rods hung down from the top of the podium, each with a camera hanging on top. At the same time, the wall behind Lan also lit up. It turned out to be a huge screen with 3 different angles from 3 cameras. Roland soon noticed a phenomenon that made his blood freeze. No matter which direction the camera shot from, the irregular crystal always showed the same appearance. How is this possible? Shouldn't it be a perfect sphere that can do this? Things with edges and corners represented discontinuous changes. Visually, each facet must be different, but he couldn't find any signs of rotation in the 3 images. It was as if it wasn't an object, but a red spot on the screen. His brain had subconsciously identified it as a virtual image and the crystal itself did not exist. However, Lan's next move surprised Roland. He saw that the chief disciple took an iron rod from his assistant and inserted it directly into the red crystal. The rod did not penetrate the virtual image as he expected, but disappeared directly in front of everyone. Through the screen, he could see that the 3 cameras faithfully restored the original appearance of the iron rod. The grinding marks on it were clearly visible, and the angle was completely correct. However, the red spot remained the same, as if 3 iron rods had pierced into the same place from different angles. When Lan pulled it back, the stick in her hand was surprisingly missing a section. The hall suddenly became quiet. In the face of such a strange phenomenon, everyone fell into silence, as if an invisible hand had covered their mouths. After a while, someone stood up and said, "Can I go on stage and have a look?" "Go ahead." Lan nodded. The man walked up to the podium and stared at the red crystal for a long time. Suddenly, he groaned and reached out to grab it. His skin glowed with a pale silver light, which was obviously the use of the force of nature. Warriors who could do this could not be underestimated. Roland had heard from Garcia that the release of the force of nature was similar to that of the fallen evils to some extent, and ordinary weapons could not hurt them. To practice this kind of skill, one either had extraordinary talent or had experienced many years of life and death battles, and was far stronger than ordinary martialists. This was probably the reason why they were so arrogant. Lan stood with her hands behind her back, showing no intention of stopping him. Then there was a shrill scream. The man did not grab anything at all. His hand passed through the crystal without any hindrance, but the part that touched the crystal disappeared without a trace, just like the iron rod. He raised his hand, and there was only half a bloody palm left on his wrist. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air in unison. Now Roland finally understood what Garcia meant when she said, "You absolutely don't want to touch it, because any contact would only turn into nothingness." When the wounded were taken away by the martialists for treatment, several more people stood up one after another, hoping to go on stage and have a look. Lan also agreed, but this group of people was much more careful when observing. In the end, the chief disciple simply arranged for everyone to take turns to go on stage and see this incredible scene at close range. Roland was no exception. When it was his turn to go on stage, he pretended to walk around the crystal twice as if nothing had happened, but his heart was in turmoil. The red ripples surging inside the crystal were so familiar. In the divine realm, he had also seen a similar scene. Chapter 860. You're Roland, right? As Roland stared at the erosion, in deep thought, Lan suddenly spoke. "Ah, yes, it's me." Roland recovered from his heavy thoughts, and Garcia's words suddenly flashed in his mind. "Wait, is she looking for trouble with me for standing her up? I've heard Garcia mention you several times." She didn't look at Roland, so Roland couldn't see her expression. "She said that you're one of the few independent awakened who hasn't been affected by desires, which is very rare for ordinary people. She's very happy that you're willing to join the association." Really?" Roland braced himself and replied. The independent she mentioned should be the same as Wild, but he remembered that the night he agreed to join, Garcia asked him to fill out the application with almost no expression on her face. How could she be happy? "Although I hate people who are not punctual, this is a common problem for most people. After all, you can't feel the passage of time, and you can't hear it ticking. So, for some special people, it's not an intolerable shortcoming." Inexplicably, Roland felt that when the chief disciple said these words, there was a hint of emotion. "But there's one thing you need to know. Even though there aren't many special people, there are still quite a few of them. If you don't cherish your own uniqueness and make full use of it, you'll be eliminated sooner or later." Was this a warning to him to serve the association wholeheartedly and not to stir up trouble like the other wild awakened ones? Roland frowned in his heart. He really did not like this kind of preaching warning. He might not have minded it before, but after becoming the king of Grey Castle, his state of mind had changed. "You can leave now." Lan turned around and said unhurriedly, "Listen carefully to what I'm going to say next. It may help you." "Next." Roland curled his lips and did not take this short conversation seriously. Now, a huge cloud of confusion was shrouding him. As for whether the Martialist Association could defeat the erosion and save the world, he did not care at all. After returning to his seat, he was still frowning. What on earth was God thinking? According to the research data of the underground civilization, the Bloody Moon was the key to transforming magic power and the foundation of the dream world. In a sense, it was equivalent to the mastermind behind the scenes. Even if it wanted to swallow the dream world, it did not have to show its original appearance, did it? The witches could see the real body of the Bloody Moon because it was the real world, but this place was a fictitious territory based on his and Zero's memories. Didn't this mean that the person with the tube at the back of the brain could see the circuit signals running behind the world? Or could it be that his previous speculations were all wrong, and there was a deviation in his understanding of the information, causing him to guess in the wrong direction? "Well, do you believe me now?" Garcia glanced at him. "That's definitely not something that can exist in reality." "I never suspected you." Roland shook his head and temporarily suppressed the distracting thoughts in his heart. "But your master isn't as scary as you say." "What's wrong with master?" She was slightly stunned. She told me a lot of things about being a special person and having high hopes for the association, Roland joked casually. By the way, she also said that you were very happy that I agreed to join the association. Is that true? I didn't see it at all. Speaking of this, he deliberately looked at the former princess of Ravenna to see what kind of expression she would show. Would she deny it or cover it up in a hurry? Whatever it was, it should be very interesting. But he never expected that she would look at him with a "you're really a fool" look. What are you talking about? Garcia rolled her eyes. When you were on the platform, Master didn't say anything at all. Do you think I'm blind? Roland could not help but be stunned. This distance may be a little far for ordinary people, but I'm a martialist. I can clearly see how many hairs you have on the platform. Do you want to lie to me? You're too young, she said disdainfully. Didn't say anything? Just when he was about to ask a few more questions, Lon had already closed the glass box and clapped her hands to focus everyone's attention on the podium. This time, the discussion in the hall was much quieter. Our world is not flat, but on a membrane. Some people can understand this and some people can't, but it doesn't matter as long as you listen to me. She turned around and let the screen behind her show what she was saying. This membrane has a curvature. Generally speaking, it appears to be an arc. In some places, this change will be more obvious. If there is another world beyond this one, then there is a possibility that the two worlds will meet at one point, and this intersection is called the erosion. Of course, this is just a speculation, but it is the only speculation that can explain the strange phenomenon we are seeing. Ever since the erosion was discovered, the various countries have never stopped studying it. Unfortunately, the world over there has a completely different rule, and any method of detection is declared ineffective. Even the matter here can't maintain stability after crossing the border. As you can see, that iron rod is the proof. What does this have to do with the fallen evils? Someone asked. Of course it does. The power they obtain comes from another membrane. This is also the reason why the fallen evils are not afraid of the mortal force. The overlapping membrane temporarily connects the two worlds. I don't know what effect this will have on the other world, but for us, the rule still works. The energy spreads from a higher place to a lower place, creating a series of incredible phenomena. Lon raised her voice. To be exact, not only the fallen evils, but every awakened person is related to this energy. What did you say? My power only belongs to me. It has nothing to do with the bullshit membrane. Does the Martialist Association think that there is no difference between us and the fallen evils? The hall suddenly burst into an uproar. This time, Lon did not say anything to stop them. She waited until everyone became quiet before she continued, Of course there is a difference. We can control it, but the fallen evils can't. But we have to admit that in a sense, we are very similar to the fallen evils, especially when it comes to resisting the mortal force. I don't know if you've ever considered this question. Since you can control the force of nature freely and become immune to any harm, why didn't the martialists dominate the whole world? People murmured. Because the erosion won't last forever, Lon said bluntly. As the curvature changes, the overlapping membranes will gradually separate until the next reunion. This cycle can be long or short. If it's short, it can be separated at dawn, and if it's long, it can be counted as hundreds of millions of years. The erosion we encountered was about 2,000 years ago, and the overlapping time was less than 100 years ago. Once it is severed, the force of nature will disappear without a trace. So, even if there are awakened ones who become unparalleled overlords and unify the world, the gap of more than 2,000 years is enough for the empire he created to vanish. It's thousands of years. Even the common history can't be described clearly. How do you know what happened in the past? Although there were still people who raised doubts, their attitude was much more restrained. I don't know, the chief disciple said frankly. It's just a hypothesis. 2,000 years ago, there was no scientific observation and recording method. If we want to verify it, we can only wait until 2,000 years later. But don't forget, history is always full of amazing coincidences. As long as we compare the biographies and history books of various regions, we will find that many heroes and legends were born in that period. Further back, it was the era of the emergence of myths. Most of the myths are related to doomsday and salvation. Can we think that it was the erosion that caused all of this? There was a brief silence. After a while, someone asked, even if those heroes were awakened by the force of nature, what does it have to do with us? According to you, even if we don't do anything, the erosion will end by itself. So what's the point of fighting against the erosion? Chapter 861. Your Majesty. Your Majesty? Nightingale's voice snapped Roland out of his daze. The director is still waiting for your reply. Ah, I understand. Roland blinked and collected his thoughts. He handed the report back to Barov. Do as you say. Yes. Barov placed his hand on his chest. Before he left, he solemnly added, Please take care of yourself, Your Majesty. After the director left the office, Roland asked Nightingale, What's wrong? Do I look bad? Well, you look fine. The latter deliberately sized him up for a while before saying, You've been spacing out a lot lately. Could it be related to the dream world's erosion? Roland shook his head. The changes in the dream world won't affect anything. It's just that some things seem a little strange when I think back on them. There's nothing to worry about. Is that so? That's good. Nightingale curled her lips. It was already the 4th day since he left the dream world. Although Faldi had successfully located the headquarters of the association, Ling could not sneak in. According to her, there had never been a place like that. It was built so deep underground that one could not even see their own fingers, but there was no shadow to hide in. Her head was full of light ribbons. She had waited for a few hours, but the light had never been extinguished. After the incident, Ling was rather dispirited and asked Roland to punish her, but the latter naturally rejected her without hesitation. The following tour plan was carried out very smoothly. After that, Roland did not stop bringing new tequila witches into the dream world. However, what he had seen and heard in the headquarters that day was still weighing on his heart like a stubborn stone. The entire incident, from top to bottom, revealed an indescribable strangeness. First, there was the conclusion about the membrane world. He had always thought that the dream world was a modern society filled with the force of nature in order to integrate his and Jia Luo's memories and to maintain internal self-consistency. In other words, no matter how many incredible phenomena there were, they were all rules set for the sake of self-consistency. Most of these rules were derived from his consciousness, so he could understand and easily accept them. However, what Chief Disciple Lon had said was completely beyond the scope of his knowledge. The only thing Roland knew was that the membrane theory was developed from the superstring theory. That was all. These two theories were particularly mysterious, and he had never read them in depth. Unlike quantum mechanics, he had at least read 1 or 2 popular science books. In the dream world, they were supposed to be invisible and hidden, just like those books that only had a cover and were completely blank when opened. However, whether it was Land's explanation or the derivation formulas and proofs displayed on the screen in the hall, they all seemed plausible. It was the first time he had seen something he could not understand in a dream. It felt like a high school student dreaming of the pinnacle of physics, the grand unified theory. It was absurd and unbelievable. This even caused him to feel that the current dreamscape was completely different from the world he'd first entered. It was as if something was growing wildly in a place he couldn't see. Another strange thing was the chief disciple herself. After Garcia's reminder, Roland realized that Marshallus had better eyesight, hearing, and reflexes than ordinary people. If Lon spoke to him on the stage, not only the guards around him, but also the newcomers in the first 2 rows of the hall should have been able to hear them. However, the fact was that no one looked at the 2 of them at that time. Even though it was not a whisper in their ears, it did not attract any attention. At that time, he did not pay much attention to it, but later he remembered that a newcomer who was taken care of by the chief disciple alone would definitely attract attention. What the other party said puzzled him as well. Listen carefully to what I'm going to say. It may be helpful to you. How would talking about the origin of the erosion and the relationship between martialists and fallen evils help him? Even if he wholeheartedly wanted to join the association and become a person who could save the world, it did not matter whether he knew these things or not. All these strange signs made Roland feel a little resistant to the dream world. He planned to temporarily stop the connection with the dream world after all the gods' punishment witches had entered and enjoyed themselves once. At the critical moment of the battle of divine will, it was better to be safe. Your Majesty? Nightingale's voice came to his ears again, this time with a faint heat. You look like you're in a daze again. Ahem, I'm really fine. Roland shook his head and put aside the distracting thoughts. I just have a little more things to think about recently, so I'm a little tired. But why do I feel that your words are a little insincere? Nightingale sat on the table and crossed her legs. Could it be that in the dream world, you and those witches, that's impossible. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. I just took them to experience different flavors of food. Well, that's true. Nightingale blinked and revealed a sly smile. I'm also a little worried. I can't go to that world, so I can't protect you at all times. If they suddenly attack, it will be troublesome. After all, you've been unconscious for hundreds of years. Now that you've finally recovered, you'll definitely want to relive all the feelings of the past. There were more than 20 witches there. How could you withstand them all at once? You're getting more and more ridiculous. Roland glared at her. Who did you learn all these ideas from? Can't you put your energy into studying? Nightingale covered her mouth. I just mentioned it casually. If I had your ability, it would definitely loudly remind me that you're lying. Roland snorted. You wanted to ask this question from the beginning, didn't you? Okay, I admit it. But it's not just me. Nightingale stuck out her tongue and disappeared. I was asked to ask this question by someone. Asked by someone? Before Roland could ask who asked him to ask, there was a knock on the office door. He had to take back his words for the time being. Come in. The door opened, and a tall man quickly walked in. He then neatly closed his legs and raised his hand to salute Roland. Your Majesty, Iron Axe reporting to you. It took about 4 or 5 days to travel from the port of Clearwater to Neverwinter, and it was quite exhausting to travel all the way by ship. However, there was not a trace of fatigue on this alien officer's face. His eyes were still full of vigor and high fighting spirit. Very good. Roland nodded gratifyingly. You should already know the battle plan of Neverwinter, right? I heard from Brian, Iron Axe replied. The first army will be divided into 2 groups. They will recover Grey Castle from the east and the west, and finally cross the border to attack the city of Glow in the Kingdom of Dawn. But there's one thing I don't understand. You asked Brian to take over my task and stay in the port of Clearwater to protect Miss Echo. Then who will be in charge of the Eastern Front? It seemed that he had already taken the main direction of the attack on his shoulders even before the task was assigned. Roland could not help but smile. Brian still lacks experience. It's not a problem for him to guard a place, but it's easy for him to lead an army alone. So you'll be in charge of the Eastern Front. Iron Axe was slightly stunned. Then the offensive on the Western Front. Chapter 862. When the last statistical form was handed to Barov, the director heaved a sigh of relief and waved his hand at his subordinates. You may leave. The latter bowed respectfully and closed the office door when he left. Only the old director was left in the room. He opened the drawer and took out more than 10 forms. He spread them on the table and stacked the latest one on top of them. In this way, all the supplies His Majesty needed for the war were ready. Barov gently stroked the papers as if he was caressing the tender and smooth skin of a young girl. The rows of numbers on them looked like complicated passwords to ordinary people, but to him, they were a beautiful movement. In just a week and a half, Neverwinter had completed a large-scale logistical mobilization. Whether it was food or Golden Dragon, it was more than any previous expedition. Through the plans and statistical forms, he could see ships of wheat sailing along the inland river toward the northern region. He could also hear the pleasant sound of the sprinkled golden dragon colliding with each other. He was intoxicated by this feeling and could not extricate himself. If he had to give a name to this movement, power would undoubtedly be the most suitable. And now, this power was lying in his hands, allowing him to play with it. After 3 years of accumulation, the strength accumulated by Neverwinter had reached an incredible level, not only in terms of the army, but also in other aspects. When he was the assistant of the finance minister in the Old King's City, he had a certain understanding of the financial situation of various places in Grey Castle. Because of this, he understood how amazing Roland Wimbledon's achievements were. The resources that flowed into Neverwinter now were probably on par with those of the other cities in Grey Castle combined. It was a pity that no one could share this joy with him. Barov took off his monocle and glanced at the empty table opposite him. The Pearl of the Northern region was probably the only person in the entire city hall who could understand these numbers and experience joy from them. Sometimes, he often felt that she was the same kind of person as he was. But this regret disappeared in the blink of an eye. Compared to monopolizing power, there was nothing he could not give up. He stood up and walked to the window. He took out a strange coin from his pocket and spread it flat on his palm. Under the light of the late spring sun, the mountain engraved on the surface of the coin sparkled. This was the emblem of the Witch Cooperation Association that he had found in the Western Forest 3 years ago. He had secretly kept it, originally thinking that when the church attacked the Western region, it would be used as evidence that the Lord had colluded with witches in exchange for his own safety. But now, this emblem had become his lucky charm. His Majesty, who protects the witches, is evil? Of course not. The evil ones were those who were defeated by His Majesty. They had no power, but they held high positions. This was the greatest crime. Even the devils of the wildlands were not as hateful as them. Fortunately, this situation would not last for long. Although His Majesty's final decision to attack the Kingdom of Dawn would delay the arrival of the moment he had been looking forward to, he had already waited for more than 20 years. What was the harm in waiting for another year? Grey Castle should be managed by someone more competent. When His Majesty unified the kingdom and ascended to the throne, he would also climb to the peak of power. Barov stroked his beard and could not help but laugh. That's all for today's test. Have you packed your luggage? Agatha asked while sorting out the experimental materials. Tomorrow is the day of departure. Don't forget anything. I don't have extra clothes, nor do I need to carry anything. Isabella shook her head and replied calmly. Life in Neverwinter was simpler than she had imagined. Except for repeatedly using the God's Stone to let the ice which observe and record, she could spend the rest of her time as long as she did not leave the Foreign Affairs building. There was neither harassment nor humiliation. The relationship between witches and pure witches was completely different. Sometimes she even felt that Agatha's attitude towards her was almost the same as that towards other witches. By the way, she added, about last time, thank you for telling me. You mean the news from the church? Agatha shrugged. If it were me, I would also want to go back and have a look, whether it's to say goodbye or to end things. But let's not talk about that for now. You can't go on the road like this. It's my fault. I didn't notice that you've been wearing the same clothes. She put down the notebook and walked to Isabella with a frown. She touched her sleeves and said, It's all white here, and you're wearing winter clothes. When the weather gets hot, do you plan to suffocate inside? That's nothing. Isabella wanted to say that she had undergone harsher training, but after thinking about it, she swallowed the second half of her words. This expedition is not a matter of 1 or 2 months. Let's not talk about whether you can wash your clothes every day on the road. Even your companions can't stand it. Agatha said decisively. Since we still have time, I'll take you to the convenience market and pick some clothes that fit you. She was slightly stunned by the words companions. After a moment of silence, she said, But I don't have money. She was a person who atoned for her sins, so she naturally did not get a monthly salary like the members of the Witch Union. As long as I have money, Agatha said indifferently. Just take it as a loan. But I have to wait for 5 years. Compared to the hundreds of years that tequila has to wait, 5 years is a very short time, isn't it? The ice switch interrupted. I'm afraid that the battle of divine will not end so easily. You can't always be like this, unless you want it to be so. She reached out her hand. So what are you hesitating about? Isabella did not answer. She suddenly felt that the sunset shining through the window was a little dazzling. In the golden afterglow, Agatha's figure gradually disappeared, leaving only the hand that was reaching out. She lowered her head and held the other's palm. At that moment, the sunlight seemed to connect with her. Is it really okay for me to go with you? Anna asked while lying in Roland's arms, blinking her blue eyes. He had been busy with the gods' punishment witches for a while, and had not enjoyed such a private moment for a long time. Because of this, even after a long time had passed, the two were still whispering to each other, as if they wanted to make up for what they had not said before. We've been preparing for so long. It doesn't matter if we take a break. Roland stroked her smooth back and said, besides, this expedition isn't just for fighting. Publicity is also very important. For example, we need to be familiar with everyone. It won't be good if we don't have an outstanding woman by our side when we attend banquets. Anna responded softly and lowered her head in embarrassment. Under the bright moonlight, Roland saw a faint blush on her cheeks. With her intelligence, she obviously understood the meaning of these words. Appearing as the king's female companion on a formal occasion was in itself a statement. I once said that one day, all the subjects of Grey Castle will know your name, even if you're a witch, he said seriously. Anna did not ask questions such as, will it be bad to do so? Or, what if everyone objects? Instead, after a moment of silence, she replied in the same serious tone, even if I'm a witch, I still want to be with you, no matter what happens in the future. Roland raised the corner of his mouth. This answer was indeed her usual style. Well, then it's a deal. The next day, the docks of Neverwinter were crowded with people. The cement boats carrying the First Army and war supplies formed a column and slowly left the Redwater River. At the forefront of the fleet was the Roland. At the top of this flagship, the flag of the royal family of Grey Castle with a high tower and a long spear fluttered in the wind, attracting everyone's attention. Everyone in Neverwinter knew that when their lord returned again, he would become the only king of this land. No one knew who shouted "Long live the king" first, and then the whole docks rang with the same cry. It sounded like thunder rolling across the sky, or like a horn of departure. Chapter 863. On the 10th day of the expedition, on the Redwater River. Roland stood on the bow of the shallow water gunboat and looked at the sparkling river in front of him, feeling quite heroic. Behind him was a huge fleet. Although a part of it had turned around and sailed to the eastern region 3 days ago, the remaining 10 paddle steamers were still a rare sight on the river. Behind him was a huge fleet. Although a part of it had turned around and sailed to the eastern region 3 days ago, the remaining 10 paddle steamers were still a rare sight on the river. After entering the central area of Grey Castle, there were obviously fewer ships, which meant that the trade center of the kingdom was moving to the western region. However, the influence of the major cities in the central region was still there. Compared with the many single-masted boats in the western region, most of the sailboats running here were much more exquisite and beautiful. Along the way, all the merchant ships they encountered along the way moved aside to avoid them. The bold sailors would lie on the side of the ship and point at the flagships made of steel in amazement. And the captains and merchants who recognized the meaning of the flag of the high tower and long spear would put their hands on their chests and bow their heads to salute this fleet. Roland was very satisfied with the wealth he had accumulated in 3 years, but he was even more gratified by the young officials trained by the city hall. They did not have a century-old lineage, nor did they have a rich family background. They just received a short-term universal education and learned to read and write. In the past, they would at most do some clerical chores for the nobles, but in Neverwinter, they gradually became the backbone of various departments. Because of the lack of a backer, the new generation of officials wholeheartedly supported Roland. Except for him, No one else would use civilians without regard for their status. Because they had never held a management position, they would carefully act according to the rules, tirelessly ask for instructions from their superiors if they encountered any problems, and did not suffer from the arrogance and conceit of the nobles. Because they were selected from ordinary subjects, they were completely hands-on. The officials of the Ministry of Agriculture led the farmers to plant wheat, and the officials of the Ministry of Construction demonstrated the characteristics of cement to the new workers. This was a common sight in Neverwinter. A strong centralized government must have a strong control over the people at the grassroots level in order to give full play to its fast and efficient potential. This just happened to meet this requirement. Of course, the leap from the civilian class to the manager was not without drawbacks. Just like a poor man who had never owned any property but suddenly received a windfall, it was easy for him to fall into the trap of greed and short-sightedness. According to the education level of Neverwinter, there was no need to mention personal qualities and professional ethics. Fortunately, Roland had Nightingale by his side. The internal investigation of the Security Bureau could effectively curb such tendencies. After several rounds of screening and severe punishment, the people who remained in the city hall basically understood the king's bottom line. The ever-growing number of young officials had become Roland's insurance to expand his influence. It could even be said that his plan to reclaim the kingdom was based on the number of available officials. Now, he finally had the foundation to unify the entire country. Inform the general staff to come to the upper observation room for a meeting, Roland turned around and said to Nightingale. They should come up with a plan on how to take over Redwater City. In fact, it was not the first time for the Neverwinter fleet to go to Redwater City. As early as half a year ago, during the tooth extraction operation, the First Army had visited this central city. Therefore, the General Staff's plan was reasonable. Your Majesty, Redwater City is a city second only to the Old King's City in the central region. It not only has a vast territory, but also has many nobles. I'm afraid we can't force the Lord to give up his power like Willowtown did a week ago. Sir Schilt, the father of the Light of Dawn, further explained, the governor of Redwater City, Earl Delta, is not an ambitious man, which can be seen from the city's tax revenue. He sits at the intersection of the inland rivers, so he can ask for more. The Delta family has been operating here for generations. Even if he gives up his fief, he won't be in dire straits. Compared with rebellion and losing his life, the Earl should make a wise choice. But it doesn't mean that other nobles will follow suit. It's not easy to unite their opinions, especially the Tri-River family and the Rockridge family. It's said that they don't get along well with Earl Delta. He pointed to the location on the map. And once your request is officially announced, it's likely that the opponents will gather together, just like what happened in the Western region. So we speculate that the First Army may go into battle and force them to give up their power. Of course, it's not a bad thing. Eliminating the rebels can reduce the trouble of subsequent management, and your powerful strength will certainly deter the rest of the people with bad intentions. So we suggest that you summon Earl Delta alone and persuade him before announcing the decree. Although those nobles should more or less know your intention. If there's anyone who disobeys, you can directly send troops to wipe them out. Roland nodded and looked at the map in silence. He didn't mind using the truth to persuade the opponents. The First Army was originally used for this. But Sir Schilt's words, just like what happened in the Western region, made him a little worried. At that time, it took longer to wipe out the 5 big families than to conquer Longsong's stronghold and King's City. The reason was that the area of these fiefs was much larger than a city, and it would take several days just to circle around them. But there were more fiefs around Redwater City. If they really wanted to wipe them out one by one, plus the follow-up pacification measures, it would probably take at least 2 or 3 weeks. Isn't there a faster way? Your Majesty, faster means. I don't want to spend too much time on this. There are still several cities to go. If we do this to all of them, when we arrive at Coldwind Ridge, half of the summer will have passed. This. Sir and the others were speechless for a while. There is a way, but it may damage your reputation, Edith suddenly said. Call them together and announce it on the spot. Roland looked at her. Go on. I've encountered the same problem as you, but it was even worse. The Pearl of the Northern Region briefly described her scheme against the Howe's family and the Lista family. If we followed the tradition of the nobles and expressed our intentions before acting, I'm afraid the Northern Region would still be in their hands. After listening to her plan, everyone in the advisor department could not help but gasp. Your Majesty, this. It's hard to convince people without evidence and without a trial. If this gets out, I'm afraid other nobles will be suspicious. Have you forgotten that besides His Majesty, there shouldn't be any other nobles in Grey Castle? Edith spread out her hands. In the past, when the nobles dealt with civilians, they didn't need a trial. Speaking of this, she looked at Roland. But whether to do this or not depends on you. After all, things like reputation. Only the winner has the right to write history, Roland interrupted her. For example, if you don't say it, no one will know you've done such a thing. I have to thank you for your trust in me. In addition, this matter will not be spread. As for the takeover plan of Redwater City, we'll do as you think. Then he saw a strange light in Edith's eyes. At that moment, the Pearl of the Northern Region's breathing seemed to quicken. However, she quickly concealed her expression and lowered her head. Chapter 864. In the mansion of Rock Ridge, Earl George Neri finally received the messenger from the Western Region. He opened the letter and read it quickly. His face became gloomier and gloomier. What does the letter say? A restless baron asked. From the river god emblem on his chest, it could be seen that he was a member of the Leviathan family, whose territory was located at the intersection of the rivers. It was a well-known family in the area. And there were more than 20 nobles like him in the study. It could be said that half of the nobles near Redwater City had gathered here. George looked at him coldly and did not answer immediately. Instead, he handed the letter to Guy Urien, the Earl of Tri-River. After Guy Urien read it, George said slowly, Roland Wimbledon deprived the Lord of Willowtown of all his power and occupied his territory. Did the new king really do that? What the hell? Then is the purpose of his trip really like what the previous news said? He wants to take back all of our titles? But it was passed down from my grandfather's generation. Willowtown is too close to Stronghold and small, but it doesn't mean that Redwater City will do the same, right? Someone suddenly said. He didn't swallow King City before, which means he can't swallow it anymore. Maybe we should wait and see. Hearing this, George could not help laughing out loud. Is Redwater City farther away from the Western Region than the city of Evernight? Is your territory bigger than the whole Northern Region? Are you blind or stupid? It's not like Roland Wimbledon wants to take back the power of all the nobles. The example of the Northern Region is right in front of you, and the news of the merchants repeatedly mention this. Now, even Willowtown has become a living proof, and you're still wondering if you're the next unlucky one? Please watch your words, Your Excellency. These mean and rude remarks made the nobles frown. Let me do it. Guy waved his hand at the Earl of Rock. In fact, you all know that our new king is definitely not an ordinary person. After being sent to Border Town, everything he had done was beyond imagination. It was meaningless to use the previous rules and experience to measure the gains and losses. I also asked someone to go to the Western Region to inquire about it. Roland Wimbledon has no intention of hiding his thoughts at all. No more land, only titles for the nobles. These have basically become the slogans of his territory, and they are openly hung in the city square. His calm tone calmed everyone down. You may say that Redwater City is not his territory, but Longsong Stronghold was not his to begin with, let alone the Northern Region. Roland Wimbledon will become the king of Grey Castle sooner or later. At that time, even if he claims that the whole kingdom is his territory, we can only accept it, and this is almost certain. Guy paused. If you lose your fief and your subjects, what will you have left? But what can we do? Khufu, who was also a baron like Leviathan, said impatiently, His Majesty Timothy was defeated, and so was the church. Who can stop him? Last time when the Western Region Army came to Redwater City, we all saw how they fought. Within 100 steps, anyone who touches the snow powder weapon will die, and even the heavy armor knight can't get close. This kind of power is not something we can compete with. His words aroused a chorus of agreement. Of course there is a way, George said coldly. Although snow powder weapons are powerful, they are not without weaknesses. They need an open space to be used. The larger the space, the more powerful it is. But if it is compressed into a narrow environment, its effect will be very limited. A narrow environment? For example, the Lord's castle. He glanced at the nobles present one by one and said word by word, "When Roland Wimbledon arrives in Redwater City, he will definitely live in the castle. There are only a few guards there. As long as we can send more people in, the situation will become favorable for us." "Lord Delta has agreed to cooperate with you?" Leviathan asked in surprise. With his character, how could he do such a thing? Even if you put a knife to his neck, he probably won't be able to resist. George shook his head disdainfully. "But this guy has helped me a lot. There are many secret passages in the castle that connect to the outer city. As long as we spread out our men and arrange them in advance, it will be fine." "How did you know about this?" "It's all thanks to Earl Delta. If he didn't like to dig around in the city, I wouldn't have been able to buy this information from the craftsman. As the saying goes, even a rabbit has several nests." "I don't know whether I should praise him for being cautious or timid," George sneered. "I originally planned to use this trick on him, but now it's not a waste to use it on Prince Roland." "But this is treason," Khufu murmured. "And if we kill Roland Wimbledon, his army will also crush us into powder." "Who said we want to kill him?" George knocked on the table unhappily. "We just need to control the situation and capture Roland in our hands. As long as the new king doesn't die, his army won't dare to act recklessly, and we can even force the other side to retreat. Once this news spreads, those nobles will undoubtedly stand on our side immediately. Don't forget, his actual control is only in the Western region. When the time comes, whether the Duke of the Northern region will insist on standing on his side is still a question mark. But he's not the real king, Baron," Guy Urian interrupted. "He hasn't carried out a coronation, and he hasn't announced it to the world. We can find another Wimbledon bloodline, someone who believes in the nobility and follows the ancient tradition of the royal family to be king. As long as we look carefully in the king's city, we will find such a person. If it really comes to that, maybe we don't even need to look, someone will already stand up." George lowered his voice. "And you all should know how much benefit we can gain from this. On one side, we will lose everything, and on the other side, we will have a glorious family. Is there any need to hesitate?" There was a commotion among the nobles. It was obvious that they had made a general choice in their hearts. George Neri was not surprised by this result. The nobles he found were more inclined to stand on Timothy's side. Even if the second prince was dead, they would not side with Prince Roland, who seriously hindered their interests. Coupled with the temptation of benefits, it was enough to make this group of cowards become bold. However, their ability was limited. Without a leader, they would just be a plate of loose sand. Only he himself was the most suitable candidate to be the Lord of Redwater City and manage the central region. After a moment, Leviathan and the others seemed to have made up their minds. "What should we do next?" You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.